evening and afternoon, technically, depending on where you are. Well, I guess I'm on the East Coast, and it's 4:46 with Adam Scherer here. So the two of us, you a little more south than I am, are on the East Coast. I guess I should still be saying good afternoon, right? I mean, unless technically people are watching on other parts of the planet, which is normal. We get international viewers here on the Awesemo channel. But for the most part, it's good afternoon still, right? Like, when do you flip the clock to where you start addressing people good evening, Adam, as I will say good afternoon / good evening to you, sir?
Yeah, I guess like around dinner time. So like what, 6 or 7?
Well, I guess it depends on when you eat, right? I mean, there are people out there thinking like, come on, Adam, I eat at 4:30 every day. So
yeah, I didn't know my grandparents were watching.
That's right. All depends on the demographic. Look, we've 15 extra minutes, juicy minutes here on a deep dive to get you prepared for a 14-game slate tonight, weather pending, of course, and we'll see how that all impacts, as it always does. Tonight's show, of course, brought to you by No House Advantage. Make sure you're following Adam on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS, at Shander Show for me. Tyler is in the house producing, so monitoring everything going on the chat as well, where you should be already, and hit us up with a like. Make sure you're subscribed here to the channel because that's key for us. And the notification bell, we'll have a live before lock coming your way at 6 o'clock Eastern. At that point, I think both Eric and Terry are comfortable saying good evening at that moment. So I wanted to bring something else up that's totally off the train here, off the rails, but it's not going to be right away. I'm going to slide this in here probably after we talk a game or two, just because we need to keep things moving to some extent with 14 games, weather pending, and the extra 15 minutes we have. But you tweeted about something, not your vacation, which I got a really good insight into. You playing golf out in Montana, and nothing related to my baby or my baby face. That we're past that here on the stream, but something you're watching, because I lived through that down in the area of Washington, D.C. So I need to get firsthand experience of your eyes to match with my firsthand experience living down in DC. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, started the iSniper documentary, which I think is I'll really enjoy. I love watching stuff about that. Easily the scariest time of my life still. Like, it feels like it was, last year or yesterday. But yeah, just crazy, and being narrated by Lee Malvo, I think is really, really interesting. So looking forward to, because I actually went to the middle school where the kid was shot at. And so looking forward to, I guess, when they get to that part, hearing him talk about that would be interesting.
Yeah, that whole time, and I wanted to bring it up just because I was there for the 2.5 years that I lived in Columbia Heights, and it was during that time, and it was unlike anything, going through COVID, going through lockdown, it was unlike anything I've ever lived through, and people were legit, like, looking around, afraid to get out of the car to go inside a mall.
Yeah, it was just nuts. Like, I remember when my parents would have to get gas, being like legitimately like scared when they would have to go get it, like what's going to happen kind of thing. It was just nuts and so hard to explain to people that like didn't live here during it.
All right. So interesting. I'm going to jump on that. Next time you and I work together, I'm going to have a recap of what I've seen so far, push it out there as well. So let's begin here. I know we're going to go game by game and kind of look at different angles throughout, but as you approach the deeper dive, as you approach this slate tonight, any general thoughts on how you're looking at it, specifically with what we have in front of us, a couple of matchups and even some stacks?
Just, I guess, more of like a generic, and I mentioned this morning too, on these bigger slates, typically raw ownership is going to be a little bit lower on guys than you get on small slates, obviously. So in a lot of cases, I don't think ownership matters quite as much, but you will still see some spots, the Cardinals in particular, Greg and I talked about a bit this morning, where you're still going to get a lot of ownership to where in larger field tournaments, it might deter you a bit. And then one other slate specific thing that I think we'll obviously talk about in more detail later, but Sonny Gray, especially on DraftKings at 7,500, I think is a really, really interesting point to think about and talk about, because he has absolute slate winning upside if he's not going to be limited. If he is limited and he's popular, that's typically a spot you want to stay away from. There's some other, I think, red flags with him. So it's just a spot where I think there's a lot of volatility, a lot of uncertainty, and it's going to be one of the more interesting spots to talk about on the slate.
All right, so let's jump in here now. And again, just kind of looking at certain games. I know there's going to be some interest, some weighted interest. We may spend a couple of more times on that. There might be some opportunity to either redline a game entirely. Maybe weather will take care of that for us as well. So let's start in Pittsburgh. Milwaukee in town. little bit of a road favorite here. That total sitting at 7.5. Odd shopper everywhere. You need to be one spot there to get odds for everything, including some player props that will sprinkle throughout. But let's start with the pitching matchup. First and foremost, Milwaukee and Pittsburgh, and really exposure that you have to either, if any.
Yeah, not overly interested in either pitcher here. Adrian Hauser, not really at a price point that I find that appealing. The matchup is good against Pittsburgh. The ballpark is favorable for pitching, but an $8,300 DraftKings price tag on Adrian Hauser, who comes in with one of the lowest strikeout percentages on the slate at 18%. He's not a bad pitcher, so it's not that I'm really looking to take bats against him. It's hard to see him, having the upside that you want at that price tag, unless you happen to get, a 7 or 8 inning game out of him, which you're obviously not relying on. On the other side, JT Brubaker, another decent arm, decent matchup against Milwaukee in a favorable park for pitchers. I don't mind the 7K price tag for him, but I still think there's some other guys in this price range that are a little bit more appealing. That being said, though, 23% strikeout percentage this year, 3.8 xFIP is solid. He's just been a pretty solid arm. And so if you're playing 150 lineups, I can see getting the sum of him as an SP2. I think he projects relatively well for his salary. But, again, there's just going to be a couple of guys that are a few $100s more expensive that I'm a little bit more interested in.
And no interest on a pivot of any kind on a FanDuel lineup where you're only locked into one. I know there are going to be some better options, but just as a pivot?
I don't really think it's necessary on this slate because there's enough just really good pitchers that you can go to. And of course, you can only roster one of them. But also with there being 14 teams, there's just going to be enough cheap bats that I don't think typically, especially on FanDuel where you do get the quality start bonus, which means you need to get at least 6 innings out of your guy. I think typically you're kind of going to put yourself in a hole if you take that approach where you're like, oh, I'm going cheap at pitcher and I'm just going to jam in all the expensive bats, because there's just so many bats on this slate that are going to be at reasonable price points that you don't really need to do that, especially when you're talking about cheap pitching that they're good, but they're not guys that project to have massive ceilings.
All right, so when we look at the bats here and specifically from a stack standpoint, and granted, we've got 14 games on the table here, and clearly with St. Louis and Colorado, there's going to be a lot of ownership. There's going to be a lot of expectation. Again, weather pending tonight, right? I believe we're going to be okay there. But just looking at how things are split, it's not a gigantic difference between, let's say, where Minnesota is and the Dodgers are, but there are a bunch of teams within them. But Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, that starts to be right there at the bottom of our top stacks tool on site. So do you look at it kind of consistently with that, Adam, or do you think that there might be some sneaky value with either the Brewers or the Pirates?
Yeah, it's not neither one's an offense that I'm super excited about. We talking about both pitchers, Hauser does a pretty good job of limiting damage. Brubaker, like I said, a 3.8 xFIP, decent strikeout numbers, doesn't give up a ton of power. He has struggled with power to righties in particular, but there's still just going to be so many guys, I think, in better spots and better hitting environments against worse pitchers that, you can target on this slate. So I don't really see much just of anything in this game.
Perfect. All right. Not even a one-off or punt. We can move on.
Not really. I mean, it's
no, that's fine.
Yeah, there's just nothing that really stands out to me on either side. I think Brubaker is probably the best fantasy option in the game, but even that is just in the context of the slate, not really a high exposure guy, I don't think.
Fair enough. All right, so Dodgers down by you, taking on the Nats, and weather, right? We should be expecting something. It's a little bit kind of hanging tonight where I am here, but I do see a little bit more expected down by you. So what's the weather and I guess the impact of the game first and foremost on that?
Yeah, I think it should be good from what I'm seeing right now. Obviously you get you're like always at risk for storms in this area during the summer, but I think this game should be good to go.
Okay, so fair enough. Now we have a different matchup for sure to take advantage of here when it comes to pitching. So looking now at Scherzer, any interest here between Urias or Scherzer here on the mound?
Yeah, I have interest in both pitchers. Scherzer, obviously, the highest strikeout percentage on the slate, 35.4%, only a 6% walk percentage, easily leads the slate in strikeout minus walk percentage as well. So obviously going to have interest there. It is a dangerous matchup against the Dodgers. One thing I mentioned this morning with Greg is that the 4.2 implied run total for the Dodgers is kind of scary, because even though that's a very low run total in the context of 2021 baseball, it's a pretty high run total for a team facing Max Scherzer. So that concerns me a little bit. Also a little bit concerned because in looking at some of the data on pitchers since they started cracking down on sticky stuff June 6th. Max Scherzer, out of the 125 pitchers that I've looked at, Max Scherzer has the 9th highest drop off in his fastball spin rate. His breaking ball spin rate is down a ton as well. It hasn't showed up in his called plus swinging strike percentage so far, though, still at 32.3% since then. So I'm not overly concerned. But again, it's just, if there are a couple of minor things worth pointing out with Scherzer. One, the difficult matchup. Two, the decrease in spin rate, I think is at least somewhat concerning, but still planning on getting to plenty of Scherzer here.
All right, some lineups coming in, and that'll definitely impact us. And the same on the other side, as you mentioned, you're getting to both of these pitchers. Are you getting to one more often? Is it Scherzer more often?
Yeah, probably. I haven't crunched lineups yet, but I think that, I'll probably get to a little bit more Scherzer. Where I'm interested in Urias, though, is particularly in tournaments. Right now on DraftKings, we only have him projected for 3.8% ownership. He has a 12.3% chance of being a top 2 pitcher on the slate, which is actually 5th highest. The matchup against the Nats isn't great, but you don't have Trey Turner in this lineup. You actually don't have Jordy Mercer either, which, while that's not a big deal, he is a relatively low strikeout guy. So it's a little bit more favorable matchup than you would normally get. And then also you get, 2 of the best hitters, I guess easily the 2 best hitters on the Nats, Kyle Schwarber and Juan Soto, both left-handed. So you have the platoon advantage for Julio Urias as well. He's struck out 30.7% of lefties this year. He has given up some power to them, but he's missing bats. So I think he's a very high upside pitcher here at a reasonable $9,200 salary that just really isn't getting ownership.
All right, so flipping it now on the bat side of it, and again, with these guys and exposure that you're getting to, how much do you counter it? Like Washington, for example, a lot of it is based on the matchup tonight, right? Right there at the bottom as far as just our top stack to where it's projected. So that would be a heavy counter from the field if you had any exposure to Washington tonight as a stack, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's tough for me to get to Washington for, a couple of reasons. For one, I think Urias is very good. For two, I don't think this Nats lineup is particularly good. And three, Urias isn't getting ownership. So you're not even really getting the, one way that you can attack leverage in tournaments. It's not just about ownership of your stack versus their chance of success. You also can view it if the opposing pitcher is popular and your stack comes through, you're knocking off a large percentage of the field that rostered that pitcher. That's not the case. We already talked with Urias that I'm interested in him because of his low ownership. So you're not even really getting that leverage on the Nats. So it makes it really, really difficult for me to get to them.
What's a baseline that you have, Adam, where if you look at what you just laid out for for Washington and staying away from Washington at the bottom there, are you looking at, for example, the Dodgers stack any differently because they provide a little more value and the ownership number isn't strong enough to be a deterrent?
Yeah, I do view the Dodgers differently here because, for one, I think they're the better offense. You can run down that Dodgers offense and just see how much power is in this lineup. So that's one thing that is always interesting to me, kind of regardless of matchup. The way I put it on the show this morning is that if you just were to stack teams like the Dodgers, like the Yankees, that have all this top to bottom power, if you were to just stack them every single slate and ignore the matchup, you're going to most likely make money in these top heavy tournaments over the course of the season, especially on these slates where people do shy away because of a difficult matchup. The probability of them having success against Max Scherzer is obviously very low, but they just have so much home run potential in their lineup. And you're still going to get, over the course of a season, a couple of bad starts usually from someone like Scherzer. So that makes them a little bit more appealing than the Nats because there is just a lot more power in this lineup. And then you're also getting Scherzer getting a lot more ownership. Scherzer right now on DraftKings projected for 27% ownership, projected to be the highest owned pitcher on the slate. So if you do happen to just get the Dodgers running into a big game, which they're certainly capable of based on their talent level against Scherzer, that's almost a third of the field that is just going to be dead because they paid $10,500 for a pitcher that didn't do well. So you get that working in their favor in addition to the fact that they're just a better offense than the Nats.
Hey, it's a great point, especially when you look at the leverage there. It's a tight line, though. And you mentioned the lineups as far as with Washington of being a little bit different. Think Washington pulls this out? I mean, look, at 105 as a home dog, it's not a ton of value by any means at all jumping out on it. And you mentioned the difference of the matchup that you trust more with Urias. So I don't know if it's even worth it to take the Nats at home tonight.
Yeah, I don't really see it. I mean, I hate the lineup they're running out. I think Urias is very good. And, again, like it's weird seeing the Dodgers be favored against Scherzer.
All right. So anybody now that you start to look at picking off from a one-off scenario here where if you're not stacking with Washington or even with the Dodgers, where you know these guys are going to cost some money, right? Especially if you're looking at the Sotos, Betts, Muncies of the world, you're definitely paying up individually, but is it worth it depending on how you're shaking out with specifically your DraftKings lineup where you may be able to pay down for your P2?
Yeah, it's actually kind of weird looking at Scherzer because in the past, he's someone that struggled with left-handed power. This year, it's actually been righties that have gotten to him a bit. 192 ISO to righties compared to 0.099 to lefties. The price tag on Cody Bellinger at 3,600 obviously stands out. He's struggled a bit this year from an expected power standpoint, but we know the track record that Cody Bellinger has of hitting for power. Muncy, from the left side has been hitting really well. And as far as righties go, of course, Mookie Betts stands out. But I think that more often than not, where I have Dodgers exposure tonight in tournaments, it'll probably just be full stacks, hoping that you just get, for example, I mentioned the decrease in spin rate for Max Scherzer. We still don't really know exactly how that's going to impact him, how it's going to affect him. So I think most of my exposure to the Dodgers will just be full stacks where it's like, okay, hopefully Scherzer just doesn't have it and is really negatively affected here.
You sure the spin rate decrease is due to age and not any sticky stuff going on?
I think it's due to sticky stuff.
Fair enough. I didn't want to dance around it.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. So we've seen that decline rapidly.
Yeah, and it hasn't negatively affected him yet. I mean, he had 8 strikeouts in 5 innings against Philly. He had 7 and 6 against Miami. His called plus swinging strike percentage is still the same. But he is, I pulled data on every pitcher that has every starting pitcher that has thrown at least 25 pitches since June 6th, which is basically when they started cracking down on it. And of those 125 pitchers, Scherzer has the 9th highest decrease in fastball spin rate over that time.
So not really working at individual spots, one-off spots for the Dodgers, just to kind of recap what you were saying. It's more about getting to them as the stack.
Yeah. Looking at it more as like, just trying to maximize my upside if Scherzer just doesn't have it tonight, as opposed to trying to find one guy that's going to homer off of one of the best pitchers in baseball.
Next game, I do think is at least the first game where we have to start looking at Yankees, Mets, Subway Series, start looking at rain and impacting this. Maybe it's full-on impact depending on how Adam sees this. But looking again, and it looks like the Mets lineup's out in full here. So we can start with Walker, clearly, unless it's Montgomery, who we think may be a sneaky P2. But are you getting to Walker as much as maybe the field, overweight on the field as your starting pitcher, even on FanDuel?
Yeah, not really interested in Walker here. Still just a tough matchup against the Yankees. He's been pretty good this year, but there's also some signs that maybe he's getting a little bit lucky. Specifically, if you look against right-handed hitters, only a 0.97 ISO allowed, but an expected ISO allowed of 167. Still not bad, but definitely a lot higher than he's allowed so far. 23.5% strikeout percentage against righties is fine, but there's just so much power in this Yankees lineup that I have trouble getting to Walker here, especially because you're not really getting a discounted AK.
So on the flip side, Montgomery, where there is a discount, at least compared with you, if you look at it compared to Walker, maybe not as far as the slate is concerned, but are you getting to much of him tonight exposure as a possible P2?
I think he's an interesting SP2 in tournaments because I think he does actually give you some upside here. And I kind of like the matchup against the Mets just because of the way that the Mets lineup is laid out. In the top pitchers tool, we have Jordan Montgomery with a 5.5% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, only about 3% projected ownership for Montgomery. But the reason I mentioned the Mets lineup is Peter Alonso, I think, is one of the best plays on the slate. I think he's fantastic. He's probably one of the guys most likely to homer tonight. James McCann is a reasonable option as well. But when you think about the Mets as a whole, a lot of their best hitters are left-handed. You have Brandon Nimmo back in the lineup. Dominic Smith's batting third from the left side. Jeff McNeil's a lefty. Conforto's not even in the lineup tonight. And when you look at Jordan Montgomery, he struck out 29.2% of left-handed hitters that he's faced this year compared to 22.2% of righties. He's given up power to righties. He's given up virtually nothing to lefties. So if he can just kind of find his way around the Lindor, Alonso, McCann part of the lineup, I don't think the rest of the lineup's likely to give him much trouble. He does have decent strikeout stuff. He is reasonably priced, and he's not getting much ownership. So certainly not someone that I'm expecting my night to hinge on, but I would expect to be overweight if he does come in at 3% on DraftKings.
Fair. Okay, so now just I'm curious because of what you were looking at with Walker and staying away from him more so because of the matchup, looking at where we have the Yankees, especially from an ownership standpoint, right down to their projection as far as being a top stack on our top stack tools that you could always use, you should be using alongside the conversation here. Yankees might be a really sneaky play. They're super low owned, and I imagine there's some fear with Walker in that. But based off you not getting to him much, I wonder if that can then be turned into getting to a heavier dose of the Yankee stacks.
Yeah, for the same reasons basically we talked about with the Dodgers. Not that I'm comparing Taijuan Walker to Max Scherzer. Walker obviously isn't as good, but it's not a great spot for the Yankees, but they're not getting any ownership. We have them projected for less than 1% aggregate ownership as a stack. And you can see why. When you look at this lineup on DraftKings, 5,600 for LeMahieu, 5,800 for Judge, 5K for Sanchez, 6K for Stanton. They're a very, very expensive stack, and they're going to be difficult to get to. But there's so much power in this lineup. And when you're talking about trying to win these top-heavy tournaments, bats typically are going to be what carry you there. There's no doubt that the Yankees always have one of the highest ceilings on the slate just because of the amount of power in their lineup. So in some lineups and tournaments, I don't mind going to like two of these, 7K or around 7K pitchers on DraftKings and stacking up these Yankees at virtually no ownership. You don't need them to be like a huge part of your night in order to still be overweight. If they're going to get about 1% ownership, you can get the job done by, just having, out of your 150, having 5-6 Yankee stacks. I think makes a lot of sense here just because of how good the offense is.
Yeah, it's not too much more by any means. You're just kind of over that 1.5 percentage point. And again, when we look at the ownerships, as you should be on the top stacks tool across the board here, there is that meaty middle that kind of starts in that 4 range and drops all the way to like that 1-2 range. But the Mets kind of sit right in there. So looking at ownership as, I would imagine, not that big of a deterrent here that you're in that 1.6% expected ownership for the Mets, Adam. I wonder if you can apply the same logic where, yes, it's simple, basically what we saw with the Dodgers and the Yankees taking advantage of circumstance more so than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different because the lineup's just not as deep. You don't have quite as much power. And then again, you run into the issue with the Mets where ideally when you stack the Mets, you get Brandon Nimmo, you get Dominic Smith, you get Jeff McNeil, because these guys are all pretty good hitters, but they have a really tough matchup against Jordan Montgomery, who has been very, very good against lefties this year. So it kind of knocks you down to like the guys you're actually interested in are Alonso, McCann, and Lindor. So kind of more of a mini stack one-off type team for me. I think McCann's a very good one-off in tournaments. I think Alonso is a very good one-off in tournaments. But I'm not as interested in full Mets stacks, even though, again, they are projected to be a little bit under-owned. I just don't think they're as likely to have that monster game in terms of home runs as it seems like the Yankees and the Dodgers are, just because of the hitters in their lineup.
Are you getting to Alonso? You mentioned as far as one-offs. Are you getting to him? Or will you? I know that the lineups haven't officially been crunched yet, but do you anticipate getting to him a lot as a one-off based off not stacking the Mets and other lineups?
I would hope to. I expect to. It's always kind of tough with baseball because like your lineups do revolve around stacking. So a lot of the times, like if I'm not stacking a team, I'm not going to get that much of a particular player. But right now we have Pete Alonso on DraftKings projected for 1% ownership. If that holds, I definitely expect to get to him. I would hope that I get to him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just crunching now, and Goldschmidt is everywhere, as expected with
right.
the St. Louis game in Colorado. So I imagine that Alonso is probably going to be one of a couple options to take advantage and being super underweight to the field with Goldschmidt.
Yeah, and that's something that we'll obviously talk about more when we get to the Cardinals, but it's a very, very good spot for the Cardinals, but there's still 27 other teams on this slate, and the chances of, even though it's a great spot, like that, and for example, the Cardinals as a team have the highest top stack percentage on the slate at 15.8%. So there's still like an 84% chance that a different team is the highest scoring team tonight. And I think that is one spot where, Paul Goldschmidt's great. Obviously, everyone knows that. Peter Alonso can just so easily go hit 2 home runs here and break the slate at 1%.
On the flip side, where, again, we look at some opportunities, take advantage of some one-offs and lineups, depending, again, are you basically going to look at the Yankees scenario where if you're not stacking Yankees, you're going to hope to get to a couple here, pretty good one-offs?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're good one-offs just because of the power upside they have, but there's no one guy that like individually stands out to me as a great play against Taijuan Walker. Like if Taijuan Walker is on top of his game, I expect him to do a pretty good job of mitigating this Yankees lineup. If he's not on top of his game, then of course you're just going to want everyone from the Yankees. So I kind of view them more similarly to the Dodgers, where I have difficulty picking out one guy that looks great. Whereas like on the Mets, I have no difficulty saying I love Peter Alonso and I don't like most of the rest of this team.
All right, not just the top stack tools. Today, actually, the player rankings are free for you. The premium tool that's free for you on Awesemo.com. But why wait, as we constantly tell you, one day a week just to take advantage of one thing that's free? You could be part of the entire community. Awesemo Plus, $29.95 a week. It's easy, it's simple, it's affordable, and you're looking at every tool and metric that we have available to you in this case here that you don't have to wait once a week to become free. So the MLB player rankings alongside the top stack tools, take advantage of everything that you can possibly do with Awesemo Plus. You want to bump it up? Awesemo Plus Platinum, still running this great opportunity to get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Just use our show code MLB Deeper Dive. That's it. MLB Deeper Dive, all caps. It's the name of the show. And use that. You can get there 25% off your first week. As you see right there, it's easy. We just keep giving you easy and easier ways to be more and more involved in this community. Number one DFS community across the board here on YouTube. So we appreciate you hanging with us. All we ask in return, give us a like. Make sure you bump that up. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well. Live before lock, Eric and Terry coming your way in, I don't know, about 48 minutes or so. All right, so let's keep it moving here. And we now go, and again, a busy slate. So we'll look and take advantage of opportunity when it's there. I know, as mentioned, we have this big one in Colorado where everybody's on St. Louis. So now in Toronto, Adam, let's start here with the pitching matchup with Tampa and Toronto. Again, another tight line here. Tampa only getting that 1.5 on the road. But as far as pitchers concerning for you, are you getting to much tonight exposure anticipated in your lineup? I can't imagine really with either of these guys, unless it's maybe a strong pivot.
So this is, for one thing, this is one game that the weather does look pretty dicey. So definitely just pay attention to, hang out in Slack chat, pay attention to weather updates as we get closer to lock. But assuming the weather works out, I am interested in Luis Patino in tournaments. He's $6,800. There's certainly risk. I mean, this is a pitcher that doesn't have a lot of major league experience, but he is one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. He's put up big strikeout numbers pretty much at every level. So far this year, he's made a total of 5 appearances for Tampa Bay. 3 of them were starts. He's struck out 30.6% of hitters in the majors. At AAA this year, he has 5 starts. He struck out 35.8% of hitters. He hasn't pitched in the majors since I believe mid-May. He threw 82 pitches against the Orioles, but at AAA, he's gone 5 innings in each of his last 3 starts. In his last start, he struck out 11 guys in 5 innings. So pretty safe to say, I don't know the pitch count number, but pretty safe to say that he threw a decent amount of pitches there to strike out 11 guys and, to go 5 innings. So I think he should probably be able to throw like 80, 85 pitches, assuming that he pitches relatively well here. It is a scary Toronto lineup. It's a scary park to pitch in because it's very favorable to hitters. But at 6,800, and most importantly, when you're taking on a pitcher with risk like this, less than 1% ownership on DraftKings as an SP2, Patino can go give you 5 or so innings and strike out a bunch of guys at 6,800 and be a pretty strong tournament play. So 2.5% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, not very high, but sub 1% ownership. Not someone that you need to build your night around, but definitely someone that I think probably should be getting a little bit more ownership than he is, assuming the weather cooperates.
No love for Manoah coming off that suspension. Come on, he's fired up. He just threw at a guy. Now he's ready to go.
Yeah, the thing with Manoah for me is just the difference in price tag. He's 7,900, so it's you're taking on just even a little bit more risk by paying that extra salary. He is a top pitching prospect as well. He definitely has the stuff to get it done. But I think if I'm going to go to one of the two, I'd just be a little bit more inclined to go to the cheaper guy in Patino. Manoah so far in the majors has struck out 26.8% of hitters, has a 4.47 xFIP. That's fine. But, again, it's the price point just kind of drives me away a little bit.
There's got to be a metric for coming off a 5-game suspension after intentionally throwing at a guy and seeing how fired up. Maybe you're too juiced up, and that's probably the wrong term to use on a baseball show, but maybe you're too jacked up when it comes to it. You can't control yourself, or maybe you're so motivated that you play above and beyond expectations. Adam, I don't know. There's got to be a metric for it.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, we got to get Alex on there. If there's anybody who can create one, it would be him. All right, so now looking at that, especially as far as Patino looking in tournaments, the flip side here are the bats. So let's start with Toronto, or pardon me, let's start with Tampa Bay, the lineup that of the pitcher you are getting to, not countering that play on a tournament. anything at all here with Tampa as far as a stack?
Yeah, I think that they're a decent stack. Right now, we have them projected to be owned about where they should be, 5% ownership share on DraftKings, 4.7% top stack percentage. But this is a favorable ballpark for hitting. It's a substantial park upgrade for Tampa Bay, getting out of Tropicana Field. And Manoah this year has had issues with left-handed power in particular. He struck out 24% of lefties, which is fine, but he's allowed a 271 ISO, 218 expected ISO. The Rays do have left-handed power, and they actually they're running a pretty strong lineup out here too, where not only do they only have two righties in the lineup, they also stack their lefties towards the top of the order. Brandon Lau leading off, Ji-Man Choi hitting second, Wander Franco hitting third, Austin Meadows fourth, Joey Wendell sixth, and then you have Kiermaier and Mejia from the left side rounding out the lineup at the bottom. That's a lot of left-handed bats that can do damage here against Manoah. So I think that they're a pretty interesting team to stack. I think they're an interesting team to mini stack. And then even grabbing one-offs and guys like Brandon Lau, Ji-Man Choi, Austin Meadows, I think makes a lot of sense because just based on what we've seen from Manoah, even if he does pitch relatively well in terms of getting strikeouts, he's pretty likely to get touched up for a home run or two here by these left-handed bats. Overall this year, he's allowed 2.12 home runs per nine. And, again, a lot of that power has come from the left side. So I think it's a very, very dangerous lineup Tampa Bay is running out here against Manoah.
How much on this slate, and I know things change, variables always change, Adam, but how much on this slate when we do have St. Louis and even Colorado and Miami coming up with double-digit ownership shares expected, what line tonight do you look at and say, all right, now the ownership becomes a factor? And we've talked about it as far as lower-owned teams right through the Yankees where you can jump on that and take advantage of it. But where does the flip side? Because Tampa normally at the 5%, okay, it's workable, but I wonder as you get higher and higher and maybe like the Royals, and we'll get to different games, I was just curious as far as that number is concerned where you'd start to look at it and maybe ownership becomes, if not a deterrent, a factor.
I mean, typically it's just, when the ownership drastically outweighs the chance of being the top stack, because that gives you a pretty good idea of if a team is underowned or overowned. In terms of raw ownership, like the Cardinals kind of stand out at like 21.5%. You're talking about, on a slate with 28 offenses going, 20% of the field in these large field tournaments having the same stack, basically. You're just, as good as the Cardinals are, you're still just kind of, that's a lot of teams to be competing against. So that gets tough, but more often than not, it's just comparing them to the top stack percentage.
So I have to address something here, and I was going to do it on the stream, but before we get on the flip side, you were on vacation and I had a child. So the last time you and I did a show together, I feel like your beard was pretty much well kept, right? Like it wasn't that much longer, right? You must have shaped it up a little bit too, right?
Yeah. I trimmed it before vacation or on vacation. Yeah.
So I had this gigantic thing, and I don't know if you remember, it was pretty loud and obnoxious, and it had to go. So I was getting a ton of shit and pressure from my wife, my in-laws, everybody would come over and say, when are you going to shave that thing? It's like leaving a car out front with the hood open. Like, when are you going to get rid of that thing? So Greg Ehrenberg was publicly shaming me about the beard on an NBA show that we did the other night, or it was an MLB show, pardon me, we did the other night before you and Lofty came on, I think. And now Kay Johnson and I think others are thinking that I shaved as a result of that peer pressure. No. The peer pressure was from my wife. I wanted to make sure that technicality is explained before we move any further. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. It's one thing to give in to your wife. It's another thing to give in to Greg.
Absolutely. Right. And I wouldn't publicly admit giving in to Greg. I have no problem admitting that I'm giving in to my wife and my in-laws and everybody else that's come over into this house. So Toronto on the flip side here, just getting back to this busy slate that we have, a little more workable maybe because they're under-owned, or are you looking at pretty much an efficient expectation of where we have them and not really looking to take a risk on them?
Sorry, was that about Tampa or Toronto?
Oh, no, we started with Tampa, right?
Yes,
no.
I know I talked about Tampa. I just didn't hear what you asked.
Yeah, I wanted to flip to Toronto. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, Toronto.
I
I don't love the spot for Toronto because, again, I think Patino is a pretty good pitcher. But I do like the ownership on the Blue Jays, given the favorable hitting conditions, given the level. There is still some uncertainty. I mean, Patino has pitched 5 games in the major leagues this year. So there is still some uncertainty, even though he is a very talented arm. Only about 1% ownership going to Toronto. This is just another example of going to guys that have a lot of power, even if the matchup isn't perfect. If 20% of the field is going to stack the Cardinals in cores because they project as the top team, and only 1% is going to take Toronto, you're just going to make money over the long run by going to these teams like Toronto and being in a much better position when they outscore the teams like the Cardinals.
All right, so looking at moving on now, Cincinnati, and I know that there was some concern as far as initially health-wise, but where are you moving here at all from any maneuverability, I would imagine, as far as your starting pitcher 2 slot for DraftKings? Don't necessarily imagine that you're moving in anybody here as far as your one guy in a FanDuel lineup.
From the Jays game?
Yes. No. Moving on. I'm sorry. To Cincinnati.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, nothing really for me on FanDuel. Sonny Gray, I mentioned at the top, is one of the bigger decision points, I guess, on tonight's slate, because on DraftKings, he's only $7,500. He comes in with the second highest strikeout percentage on this slate at 30.1%. The issue is that this is his first start since coming back from the injured list. He made one rehab start at AAA, but he only threw 3 innings. I haven't seen anything official as far as a pitch count for him, but I assume he's going to be limited at least to some extent. I'd be very surprised if he's just full go and can go out there and give you close to 100 pitches tonight. So I think it's reasonable to think he's probably going to throw like 70, 75 pitches until we see something, more concrete. And he's getting ownership. So if he weren't getting ownership, I would say that it's interesting in tournaments because he's clearly underpriced for his talent level. And, you can just hope that he has a somewhat efficient game and puts up a good score at 7,500. But with him projected for 23% ownership right now, I would expect that I probably end up a little bit underweight just because there's a lot of ways this can go wrong. For one, it's baseball. He can just have a bad start because he has a bad start. He could be rusty. Again, he's made one start. He made one rehab start. He walked 3 guys in those 3 innings. So that's not really something you like to see either. One other thing I mentioned this morning, he's only made 1 start since the sticky stuff crackdown, but his spin rate was way down on his breaking stuff in particular. So that's, another thing where potentially he is going to be a different pitcher now. We don't know. The point here is just there's a lot of uncertainty around him for a pitcher that a quarter of the field is rostering when there are plenty of alternatives around him. So anybody that, has followed me in previous seasons knows how much I love Sonny Gray. I think he's a very good pitcher. I love him as a DFS pitcher. I'm not denying the fact that he can go out and have a very good game here, but I do think there's a lot of volatility around him. And if he's going to get a lot of ownership in tournaments, I'm inclined to just go away from that because there are guys that you can pivot to that are likely to throw more pitches if they do pitch well. And, I do think there's just some red flags with Gray in general.
All right. So both teams now starting to be upwards. Now we did have Tampa in that larger kind of higher pool, if you will, of our top stacks where you should be following everything and paying attention as Adam is explaining the metrics and kind of where the advantages may be. This is now where we at least have one game where both teams are kind of hovering in that middle to top tier, if you will, of stacks. So are you getting to, let's start with Cincinnati, where there is, as you mentioned, a lot more of volatility surrounding Gray. How about the bats here in this matchup against Mills?
Yeah, I don't really love the Reds bats here. Alec Mills isn't a very good pitcher as far as DFS goes. He doesn't strike out a lot of guys, but he also doesn't give up a ton of power. Just below 100 expected ISO allowed to righties this year, 177 to lefties. We don't have a Reds lineup yet, but it's a good park. They have a nice 5.5 implied run total, but looking at the top stack tool, 3.5% chance of being the top stack, almost 6% ownership share. So if the ownership were to come down, I could see getting to Cincinnati because, again, it is a pitcher that's going to let you put the ball in play. It is a park that plays up power, but right now we have a lot of ownership going to the Reds, and I think I would just like to look elsewhere.
Yeah, and you've given already a couple of really good opportunities to take advantage of that under-owned team. So one-offs before we move to Cleveland?
Not really one-offs, but I will say the Cubs as a full stack, just going back to the amount of question marks around Sonny Gray and the fact that he's projected to get a lot of ownership here. It's a favorable hitter's park. There is certainly some non-zero chance that Sonny Gray just is rusty. There's some non-zero chance that we see a Sonny Gray drop off without whatever he was using as sticky stuff. There's a lot of ways, that you could just look back on this game. Like there's a lot of different ways that going into Sonny Gray's next start, you could look back and be like, his last start was really bad. I'm really nervous. And so with the Cubs only getting 1% ownership, I do think that this is a spot, and with Gray getting almost 25%, I do think this is a spot where just full stacking the Cubs and hoping you get bad Sonny Gray makes some sense.
All right. So now we have, I believe so far, the highest cost pitcher on the slate that we've had to date right now. Well, let's move into Cleveland. Houston on the road, heavy favorite, 186, laying it on Odd Shopper. Again, best place where you can go to find the best number in case you were looking at working Houston in Cleveland. That total, not necessarily high compared to the slate. It's not just Colorado that has a double-digit. Even 2 I see now inching closer, if not at 10. So let's start here with the pitching matchup, Adam. Is there anything that jumps out? You've got a completely different opposite end of the spectrum from a super high-cost guy in McCullers down to a really 5,800 low, super low cost.
Yeah, not really interested in either pitcher here. Lance McCullers is a pitcher that in general I've really liked in the past, but he is coming off of an arm injury. You have seen the strikeout numbers not look quite as appealing this year. He's also walking a lot of guys. Comes into tonight's game with a 12.5% walk percentage to go along with his 26% strikeout percentage. One other thing that is kind of concerning to me is typically for McCullers in the past, he's been much better at striking out left-handed hitters than right-handed hitters, which is something that would actually be kind of useful against this Indians team. But this year, he's struck out a higher percentage of righties than lefties, and you're just seeing, the strikeout numbers not be as good. The reason that he's been, I don't want to say reverse splits, but had better strikeout numbers against lefties in the past is because he relies so heavily on his curveball. That's a pitch that you'll often see pitchers have better strikeout numbers against opposite-handed hitters, but the strikeout numbers are down a bit this year. So at his price point, I just think like I'd rather go to Julio Urias at lower ownership or at low ownership. I'd rather go to Lance Lynn if I'm just looking for someone to get a lot of points in that price range. So I think it's gonna be pretty tough for me to get to McCullers over either of those guys.
There seems to be some pretty good value, at least on the surface, with Houston tonight, depending on how you actually like that matchup. And I'm just using the metrics that we have as far as where we have them predicted fourth overall. Now, the only other team I think that you can make this argument with maybe Minnesota because they're even more low owned, but comparative to Colorado, St. Louis, Miami, Houston is really workable from an ownership standpoint.
Yeah, they are. They're projected right now. They have the third highest top stack percentage, only about 4% aggregate ownership. The problem for Houston is this lineup is absolute garbage. You don't have Yuli Gurriel. You don't have Yordan Alvarez, who's on the paternity list. So, you have Altuve, Brantley, Correa, Tucker, 1 through 4, which is fine. And then you just have the Astros AAA team, basically. Chas McCormick, Abraham Toro, Taylor Jones, Miles Straw, Jason Castro rounding out this lineup. On the one hand, those guys are all cheap, so it makes the Astros a much less expensive stack than they normally are. But on the other hand, those guys all also kind of suck. So it's not a very good Astros lineup. I still think going to these top 4 guys is good. One thing to point out is that Sam Hentges is a lefty, but he hasn't done a very good job of actually getting lefties out this year. He only has a 20.5% strikeout percentage. He's allowed a 208 expected ISO to lefties, 292 to righties. So don't shy away from Michael Brantley. Don't shy away from Kyle Tucker. The problem, again, though, is just that like this offense, the particular lineup they're running out, lacks a lot of the ceiling that the Astros normally give you.
Paternity leave. What is this? Come on, man. I had a kid a week and a half ago. It's the wife that's doing all the work. I tell you, paternity leave is the biggest. It is the biggest racket going on, man. I'm telling you, where it's like the dad can be back to work the next week. The mom is doing all of the work. She's doing the heavy lifting. She's raising the child immediately. The bond of breastfeeding, even if you're in a bottle, like I get it, the whole shifts and stuff, but come on, you could go back to work. I'm sitting here doing this and I'm not working hard. You're the one working hard. And I'm back a week and a half after having a kid. I didn't even have the kid. My wife did, Adam.
Yeah, I wish Alvarez was taking the same approach.
Fair enough. Maybe I'm not the best one to be giving other fathers advice either. So I understand my lane by all means. So from there, the flip side would be Cleveland. The flip side would be trying to take advantage of any small opportunity with Cleveland, who, again, like Washington, like Pittsburgh, teams we've brought up, we have super low when it comes to predicted of top stack.
Yeah, I don't really see it on Cleveland. I'm not that interested. I'm not interested really in McCullers from a DFS standpoint tonight, but he's not a guy that I'm looking to pick on either. I still think he's a good pitcher. His biggest issue, again, is just the walks, which, that can get him out of a game early. It can give extra base runners to the Indians, but they're not going to pile up. You're not going to pile up, tournament winning scores by walking. And, I just think he's a good enough pitcher that there's a lot of spots that look very good on the slate. I don't think Cleveland's one of them.
Yeah. So I assume you're not really squeezing anybody from Cleveland, probably more so with Houston, where if you're not getting to them as a stack, you're going to pick maybe one or two guys off. But safe to say that's not the case with Cleveland.
Yeah, the Astros, I think, are the bats that you want here.
Is there anybody specifically that you anticipate getting to the most in a one-off scenario? Only because I know I mentioned the value with the stack, and it is difficult to kind of maneuver the one-offs throughout, especially with this bigger slate. But I am curious if you do at least anticipate heavy exposure.
I think Kyle Tucker, actually, which is weird because it is lefty-lefty. But like I said, Sam Hankins doesn't do a great job of getting lefties out. And Kyle Tucker, in a relatively small sample in his career in the majors so far, 218 plate appearances, but he does have a 198 ISO. He has a 381 expected WOBA, 280 expected ISO in those plate appearances. So he hasn't had any issues with lefties. And again, this is a lefty that doesn't really do anything special getting other lefties out. So, like Altuve would be, someone else that stands out, but he's exorbitantly priced. I could see Kyle Tucker just making his way into a lot of lineups as a one-off.
All right, in Detroit now, White Sox, Lynn, Mize, definitely two guys that you're going to be spending some money for on the slate. Exposure to either or both of these guys, Adam?
Lynn for sure. I have trouble getting to Casey Mize at 9K, but Lance Lynn comes into this game. He's having another good season. He throws a lot of pitches, which is really nice because even if he does kind of get into trouble at certain times, he can work his way out of it. And even if he gives up a couple of runs, he's one of these guys where sometimes it's like, man, Lance Lynn's bad, through 2 innings, but then he just throws so many pitches. He still ends up going 6 innings and getting you a respectable score. He comes in with the 3rd highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 28.5%, which is really good to see. And the Tigers are, a pretty bad offense. One thing that I don't love for Lynn is that throughout most of his career, we've seen drastic, just massive splits in terms of his strikeout numbers against righties compared to lefties. He always strikes out a ton of righties and typically doesn't strike out a lot of lefties. Last year, he did a better job striking out lefties, but then this year he's back to having a 35% strikeout percentage against righties compared to 22.5% against lefties. 22.5% is still fine, and the Tigers will certainly just give you some strikeouts anyway, but I would prefer if this lineup were a little bit more right-handed heavy. That being said, though, that's really the only negative thing I have to say about Lance Lynn. I still think he's a very good option, and I expect to have him in plenty of lineups.
Is he a P1 FanDuel option for you?
Yeah. I think he's one of the options on FanDuel, even on the one pitcher site. A lot of these guys that are cheap that we've talked about on DraftKings aren't really options on FanDuel, right. But I do think that at 10K, you still get enough of enough ceiling from Lynn, plus the fact that he's likely to go deep into the game and get you that quality start bonus.
Is the hesitation with Mize about the matchup, or is it more about the number? Because I ask in the backdrop of getting to the White Sox as a stack, which we do have as pretty high here, only about 6 teams in front of them as far as their predicted stack to be, or predicted value of being in the top stack.
Yeah, kind of a combination of both. Casey Mize is a top pitching prospect, former number 1 overall pick, has good stuff, but hasn't really translated it into strikeouts so far in the major leagues. Only comes into tonight's game with a 19.8% strikeout percentage. So just not really someone I can bring myself to pay $9,000 for. As far as the White Sox go, the biggest issue that Mize has had so far is giving up power to lefties. Since last year, he's allowed a .093 ISO to righties, but a 268 ISO to lefties. So you kind of want to look for left-handed power. The issue is that the White Sox right now don't have a lot of it. Yohan Moncada is not in the lineup either, which hurts. But you do have Gavin Sheets batting second, $2,500 on DraftKings. He's someone that you certainly can use as a value bat from the left side. He's cash viable potentially, depending on where you go with your build as well. Yasmani Grandal at catcher is fine. Probably my favorite bat from the White Sox is Brian Goodwin, hitting 5th at $3,300 on DraftKings. That's a guy that has some power, can definitely do some damage here. Going back to the start of the 2019 season, Goodwin has a 183 expected ISO, 320 expected WOBA against right-handed pitching. So yeah, 3,300. I think there's some value there.
It's the flip side here. Detroit does not have a really good indicator tonight, and a lot of it is the matchup, right? You're getting to looking at the pitching matchup specifically, but as far as their stack, I mean, they're pretty high for their value. They do have some ownership a little bit attached to them, but it's not like they don't have much ownership attached to them. But right there at the bottom, as far as where we predict them on site, top stacks tools that you should be using, of course, part of the $29.95 Awesemo Plus package here, we don't have them predicted high at all. They're right there flat at the bottom, but there is a little bit of value that's associated with them, where even if you search by it and just looked at the value itself, Detroit is higher than a couple of teams we've already mentioned.
Yeah, they're really inexpensive, but they're just in a really bad spot against Lynn. They're a terrible offense. And I don't really know, like, I don't think this is a slate where you need one of these really cheap offenses. It's not like the other day when we had, I think it was a 7 or an 8 game slate where pitching was really, really bad, except you had like, I don't remember who the 2 pitchers were, but you had like 2 aces and then a bunch of just garbage pitching. And so it made a lot of sense to just like use some really cheap stacks and hope for the best. On this slate, you have Scherzer, who has some question marks of his own. He's the only pitcher on DraftKings above 10K, I believe. So it's just not the type of slate where I'm looking to go to a really cheap offense that I think sucks and that I don't think is going to do well. Lance Lynn doesn't give up a lot of power either. Less than 1 home run per 9 innings this year. I just think Detroit's one of the least appealing spots on the slate.
All right, so in Atlanta now, Miami, we'll talk, and we've mentioned and referenced where Miami is right there, at least initially, as far as a high stack owned, at least high stack team. It's dropped a little bit since the start of the show. They've actually moved back into single digits, but at one point they were. But before that, let's look at this matchup, Lopez and Smiley here. Again, a little bit of a difference in the cost for sure. So are you paying up or maybe looking at Smiley as an opportunity to pay down for a P2?
Smiley's getting some ownership right now, which I get it because he's only 6,700 on DraftKings. We have him projected for about 12% ownership, only about a 5.8% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. To put that in context, Logan Gilbert, who we'll talk about on Seattle, is slightly higher at 6.5%. JT Brubaker's at 9.5% at a similar price point. There's some other guys, that you can look to as well. Jordan Montgomery, about the same chance of being a top 2 pitcher, but getting like 1/4 the ownership of Smiley. So I don't anticipate myself getting to Smiley in tournaments, at least not much. I think that I can roll the dice. Like, it's not like he's not risky. Miami's not a great offense, but they do have some right-handed power that can do damage. They're running out almost an entirely right-handed lineup against Smiley. He's only struck out 17.5% of righties this year, 187 expected ISO to them. So it to me just sets up as a spot where he's probably just going to get too much ownership because people say, oh, take pitchers against Miami and he's cheap. Where I actually do have interest in the pitching is Pablo Lopez on the Miami side. I was kind of hoping that Ronald Acuna wouldn't be in the lineup for Atlanta tonight, but he is leading off. But still, you get this Atlanta lineup that is predominantly right-handed and does have some strikeouts in there. You talk about, Freddie Freeman, Ozzie Albies from the left side can definitely do some damage. But other than that, Acuna's right-handed, Riley, Swanson, Heredia round out the top 6. They're all right-handed. William Contreras batting 8th is right-handed, and then Smiley batting 9th as a pitcher, so he doesn't really matter. You only have 3 lefties in this lineup. Only 2 of them are good in Freeman and Albies. And Pablo Lopez has just been flat-out dominant against right-handed bats this year in terms of strikeouts, 31.6% strikeout percentage. So it is a risky matchup against the Braves, but he's in that same boat for me as Julio Urias, where Lopez has about an 11% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. He's only getting about 7% ownership. I think that it's another spot where you can look to be contrarian at pitcher because it's risky, but he does have a very high ceiling.
All right, super chat, just to bring to light here. Justin Bruce, we appreciate you. Everybody weighing in on the super chat. Hit us up, like, subscribe. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're not late to the party here. Justin Bruce, second place, 1K finish in the DK12 VSC last night. Mailman, don't have time to research, only listen to Awesemo YouTube shows. Big thanks, guys. I'm sure you were a part of that. If not physically, then in spirit. Maybe on the chat. No?
Oh, sorry. I zoned out.
That's fine. No worries. And then I think, all right, let me clear this up because I didn't realize that the kid wasn't born yet. So I thought that the child was already born. So I'm not going to walk it back entirely about the paternity leave. I still stand with my statement that if your son, daughter, if your child is born, you don't need to take 6 weeks, 2 months, whatever it may be for paternity leave. But as far as the birth of your child, okay, I'd be willing to meet you halfway. And I'd say that's the night that you take off. And then you come back after. Take a week off, man. That's it. 1 week.
Yeah, I don't care. I still want him in my lineup tonight.
There you go. Fair enough. All right. I feel even better that you side with me. Anything. So Miami is super high owned. And I imagine that has a lot to do with trying to victimize Drew Smiley. You did mention that there is some ownership, though, for Smiley. So do you have interest in getting to Miami, especially because we don't really have them predicted that high and they're really high owned?
Yeah, it's kind of tough because I do think Miami's one of the most appealing like value stacks on the slate. Only one guy on DraftKings is above 4K in salary. So I think it is a high upside spot. Drew Smiley actually gives up more power to lefties than righties, but he still has allowed a 176 expected ISO, or sorry, a 187 expected ISO to righties. And like I said, not striking a lot of guys out. And you do have some right-handed power bats on Miami. Garrett Cooper back in the lineup since 2019. Cooper has a 244 expected ISO against lefties. Adam Duvall's at 341. Jesus Aguilar's at 184, which is fine. Jorge Alfaro's at 231 as, a catcher with some power. Starling Marte is just a high upside player in general because of his stolen base upside. So this is a lineup that actually can do some damage. But, again, it's just a collection of hitters that have power but aren't very good. So the chances of Miami actually putting a big game together are still relatively low just because of the lack of overall talent. But I think, more interested in kind of just trying to grab these guys as one-offs. None of them are getting tons of ownership individually. Like right now we have Garrett Cooper at 12% on DraftKings as the highest owned guy from Miami, Adam Duvall at 10%, Alfaro at about 10%. That's still, reasonable ownership to where I don't mind taking them as one-offs or mini stacks. I think they're pretty useful in cash games as well because of their salary.
Yeah, so looking at the flip side now, I don't imagine that you're going to get to Atlanta much, but if you are, is it at all in an individual capacity?
Freddie Freeman, I think. Freeman and Albies, but they're both so expensive that it's going to be really tough to get there. It's really, I think when you're targeting Pablo Lopez, unless you're going just the full stack approach, knowing that Atlanta has good hitters and they're going to be pretty low owned, 1% aggregate ownership, 2% chance of being a top stack, you can certainly go that route. But as far as just targeting like individual hitters, you're going to want lefties, primarily against Lopez. He's given up a little bit more power to righties, but the strikeout numbers are just so drastic that I would rather go to, if I'm going to someone individually, I would lean towards someone like Freeman.
All right, we have a bunch of different things we continue to tell about here, of course, on site here. And one of them is what we're doing with No House Advantage. It is a go-to spot for player props. It's a great use of a metric. If you're looking at books as well, you'll always be ahead of the line at No House Advantage, and it's for everything. Basketball still going on. Baseball right now, as we talk about, there's golf, there's football around the corner, everything for cash prizes. It's all peer-to-peer, and you're taking full advantage of things that are locked in early. So if you're not sure if somebody's going to play and there's a line that's reflective of that earlier in the day, and then all of a sudden that guy's out or he's in, it doesn't matter because you're locked in and that won't move. So it's a beautiful opportunity for you to make money where it's way departure from the traditional DFS site. So we have a code for you. As always, $20 for your first match deposit bonus today. Use Awesemo, AWESEMO, and start right away. I mean, you and I talked about it. You were the one when we first, I think the first show I did ever was with you back when I didn't know how to pronounce your last name. And you were the one explaining to me about how the lines don't move at NHA. And as somebody who lives in a state where all of this is legal, my jaw's just dropping like, oh my God, are you serious? I can beat the books with NHA. So I credit you, Adam Scherer, for that.
Yeah, I'm excited for when I'm finally going to be
soon
allowed to. Yeah. Actually checking now to see if that's changed yet because I haven't checked in a while.
You don't have like one of these big clocks behind you. That's what we need. Now, you can't take the Taylor jersey down. That's legend. There's actually a lot of stuff down there that you can't take. So maybe you could just somewhere like jam it in there, but a countdown, right? Countdown until that happens.
Yeah, until I can bet sports in Maryland. But yeah, still cannot get on No House Advantage.
Amazing. All right. And again, we thank them and thank you out there for giving them a shot. Awesemo is the promo code, $20 to match. All right, let's keep it moving here and get to the big one. St. Louis, right? Everybody's on St. Louis tonight, Adam. So how do you approach the Cardinals?
Play them in cash for sure. No doubt about it. The pricing is just so cheap. The spot is great. They're in Coors Field. They have a 6.5 implied run total. They're facing Chichi Gonzalez, who is absolutely terrible. 14.5% strikeout percentage against lefty or righties, 13.2 against lefties. Hasn't given up a ton of power to lefties, has given up a ton to righties, but it's just a great spot for the Cardinals. The problem in tournaments is just that, and I mentioned it earlier, they far and away have the highest chance of being the top stack tonight. They have a 16% chance of being the top stack. Next highest is Colorado at 9.5. But that's still an 84% chance they're not the top stack. You have 19.7% aggregate ownership going to this team. Individually, just all of these hitters are getting, a lot of ownership. 28% to O'Neill, 26 to Goldschmidt, 22 to Arenado, 22 to Carlson, 20 to DeYoung, 16 to Molina. Like, if you roster the Cardinals, and this is, mostly true or specifically pertaining to the large field top heavy tournaments, if you roster the Cardinals and they do just crush the slate, great, you're going to have a lot of good teams. But if you're talking about like a 15,000 person tournament, you're still talking about like 3,000 other teams that stack the Cardinals or have these hitters in general that you have to compete against. If you just say, it's baseball, I'm going to spread my exposure around to a lot of these other teams that are getting 1/10 the ownership and hope that they outscore the Cardinals, which, that basically taking the field against the Cardinals, you're going to come out ahead a lot more often in terms of just finishing at the top of these tournaments. So it's not going to feel good if you're underweight on the Cardinals, but I just think that, if you are playing tournaments consistently and you're taking this approach night in and night out, you will have more success by trying to capitalize on the nights the Cardinals, for one reason or another, don't do well, than by trying to just like out muscle the field basically and jam in the Cardinals over top.
Can you get to Colorado at all in any cash games?
I think Garrett Hampson looks really good at 4K at second base. Second base is a pretty weak position, so he looks good there. If you get to like Tapia or Blackmon, I think it's fine. The reason that I don't think that there are priorities, though, is when you look to the outfield for the Cardinals, Dylan Carlson at 3,900 is going to look better. Tyler O'Neill at 4,100 is a better value. So those guys kind of stand out and help sort of block Colorado. But the Rockies or the Cardinals don't really have a cheap second base option. Tommy Edman at 4,600 is okay, but not one of the better values. I think Garrett Hampson's the best cash play from the Rockies.
Now, don't even talk about the pitching matchup. You're okay with that, right? You're not getting to either one of these guys?
Yeah, no, maybe, don't do
it. No, I just wanted to make sure. Very, very rare am I leading it as far as like, okay, let's move on, or red line, or because I fear you being like, wait, we missed this one nugget. But I think we're both okay with moving on. We do have a couple of more games to get to as well. So clearly that's the approach for St. Louis. You mentioned as far as Colorado, especially in cash games. So Royals, Minnesota, you mentioned some concerns here, right, about weather? Oh, no, was that a different game?
I think this one looks okay
fine here.
Yeah.
Okay. So fair enough. So I thought, you know what? It was another game that I got caught up on. So from Colorado to Kansas City, let's start here. Hap at the top. And I forget who it was. It was on the show that I was doing with Gundacker, but somebody on the stream said I look like J.A. Hap. So, again, I'll take that. Yeah? Okay. Look, Hap's not an ugly individual, so I'm okay with that. Are you getting the Hap tonight at 68K on DraftKings? Nope. No. Neither are you getting the Singer, right?
Yeah, not getting the Singer either. Greg made an argument for Singer this morning that I don't disagree with. Singer, I think, is a better pitcher than his salary suggests. I think, he's just not a bad pitcher. He's young. He's going to be inconsistent, but he, has a 23% strikeout percentage this year, only a 4.12 xFIP, which isn't bad. The problem for me is just that I think, I'd rather go to like Patino at 6,800 than Singer at 6,500. I'd rather go, we haven't talked about him yet, but I'd rather go to Logan Gilbert at 6,600. And there's plenty of guys like a little above 7K that I like more than Singer as well. I think it's a relatively difficult matchup here against the Twins. You're getting a pretty solid lineup from them. You have Donaldson in, Cruz is in, Kirilloff, Polanco, Kepler all in the lineup. So it's one of the stronger lineups the Twins can run out. They have a 5 implied run total, and it actually looks like the weather is supposed to be a little bit warmer here than it is in a lot of the other games on the slate. So, just not really interested in pitching here on either side.
No, and fair enough. Neither is Vegas or the books, wherever it may be legal. I mean, that total odd shopper, you can get over 10 or even under, depending on where you're looking at it but that's the total right there. So the only other double digit locked in, at least, is the one in Toronto, outside, of course, in Colorado Coors Field, where it's obvious. So expected offense across the board. Minnesota comes in as barely, but a light road dog, but they're pretty high up on our stack tool. So are you looking at Minnesota compared to where they may be owned, which is super low?
Yeah, I really like the ownership that we're getting on Minnesota right now. On the one hand, I do think Brady Singer is decent, but on the other hand, he's definitely not, a pitcher that can't have a bad start. He has done a really, really good job this year of limiting power to righties so far. He's given up a bit more to lefties with a 180 ISO, but guys like Josh Donaldson, Nelson Cruz certainly can do damage against anyone. And then from the left side, you have Kirilloff, Polanco, Kepler, all have some power. So I do think that there's a pretty high ceiling for Minnesota, even though I think Singer's decent. And I think that, the ownership is lower than it should be. You also have Trevor Larnach batting third for Minnesota from the left side. He's the Twins' number 2 prospect, according to FanGraphs. He has average-ish power, but batting in the middle of this lineup at a cheap price tag, he's certainly someone to look to in tournaments as well.
So we had a similar situation with this earlier in the show, and I'm guessing that Kansas City kind of falls into this where too high owned, too cheap, and that's where there's going to be people racing to fill in on a stack that's just not going to pay off.
Yeah, it kind of sucks because I like Kansas City here. I don't think J.A. Happ's very good. I think he gives up a lot of power. He's allowed a 259 expected ISO to righties with only a 17.5% strikeout percentage. So it makes guys like Jorge Soler and Hunter Dozier look really good. But the problem is they're just so underpriced that they're going to get a lot of ownership. So you can use them as one-offs if you're playing like a low-owned stack. Don't be afraid to use Soler or Dozier. Both guys have a ton of power. But in your more popular stacks or where you have more popular pitching, you'll probably want to look elsewhere just to try and get some lower-owned guys into your lineup. If you are stacking Kansas City, I think the way to do it is probably to use the expensive guys as well, because I think you're going to have, Soler and Salvador Perez at catcher, and to some extent Dozier maybe. Actually, Dozier's only projected for 4% ownership right now. It's pretty much Perez and Soler driving up the ownership. So if you run this stack where like maybe you go Merrifield, Soler, Santana, Alberto, Dozier, and skip Perez, or something like that, you're still going to get a pretty low owned stack, even though the aggregate ownership is high because you're skipping the most popular guy in the stack. So I do think there's still ways to get to Kansas City, but you'll want to pay attention to who's in your lineup because you're going to get a lot of ownership going to Soler and Perez individually.
So doing shows where there's live chat from both hosting to just being a voice across the country doing it all day, I know it's very difficult doing what you're doing, which is giving information and insight while responding to somebody pinning you in a corner that's not true on chat. So can you explain what you were saying, which is you're not using a certain metric that somebody, I don't even know if that's real, but I know that you're trying to explain something on chat that if somebody thought, I guarantee you there are other people that may think maybe not you are doing this, but other people may be doing this, and that's using a pitcher versus another pitcher prior start.
Yeah, pitcher versus team. It's just not, it's not predictive. Like the pitcher in question was Pablo Lopez, who I guess has struggled against the Braves this year. There's just nothing that you're really taking away from that makes him likely to do worse in this start. Like the Braves are a good offense. They're going to have good games against pitchers like Lopez a pretty high percentage of the time. It doesn't change the fact that Lopez has good strikeout stuff and is facing a right-handed heavy lineup. So the ceiling is high, and it is risky. He could certainly have a bad start, but the fact that he's had those starts in the past doesn't really change the fact that he strikes righties out a lot and that the Braves are a good offense. Like both of those things are true. Just because it didn't work out the last time doesn't mean it's not going to work out this time. You already know the risks are there. The ceiling is also there though.
I was just saying, much easier to make your point when you can with the mic than as far as jamming with the fingers. And I saw you and I figured, all right, let you have the floor to kind of explain that. We do have some games we're still going to get to, but it was worth the explanation by all means. You mentioned Griffin Canning. All right. Now 7,600 on DraftKings. So I imagine you're working him a lot in lineups. How do you approach him specifically, even if it's on FanDuel?
Kind of just a average pitcher. I think it's a good spot against Baltimore. 4.1 implied run total. One thing I do like is that Cedric Mullins and Anthony Santander both will be hitting left-handed in this game. But other than that, the hitters that you're actually concerned about on Baltimore, Mancini, Mountcastle, Hayes, are all right-handed. So that benefits Canning because he has been good against righties this year, 27.5% strikeout percentage. He does give up some power too, though. So I think it's a spot where, in tournaments, you can take some shots on Canning. He's one of these mid 7K guys that you can look to. But I'm not super confident in him here. We have him with a 5.5% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. We have him with 6% ownership. I think that'll make sense. He's someone that you can use, in tournaments, but I don't feel great about him here.
Yeah, and looking at the other side, I mean, Eytan is just such a low-cost guy. Imagine that's a punt probably not worth kicking unless you're just paying up for bats.
Yeah, for the love of God, don't play Keegan Eytan.
There you go. Okay, that's fine. Now, from a stack standpoint, the Angels can definitely victimize him, right?
Yeah, the thing that kind of sucks is that the Angels don't have a lot of hitters that you really want. No Mike Trout in the lineup. Shohei Ohtani, I think, is a really, really, really good tournament play. He's priced back up to 5,900. He's in the lefty-lefty matchup, so there's a chance that people are gonna, look at that and not want to pay that salary. But Keegan Aiken has struck out 29% of lefties this year. He's still allowed a 196 ISO to them. And Shohei Ohtani, more importantly, is just a phenomenal hitter. He, going back to 2019, has a 244 ISO against left-handed pitching, so he's been perfectly fine in that split. And there's a very good chance that Keegan Aiken just doesn't last far into this game either. And you get Shohei Ohtani against a bunch of bullpen arms. So don't let the salary scare you off. He's not somebody that's going to be showing up in your cash lineups like he was when he was 4,800, but he is still an extremely high upside play in tournaments. Beyond him, I think David Fletcher, if he's leading off, he's not a very good hitter in terms of power, but he will put the ball in play. He is someone you can look to at that weak second base position, especially in cash. Anthony Rendon at 4,700, I think, is a very strong third base option. And then beyond that, you're kind of just hoping for the best with guys like Jared Walsh in a lefty-lefty matchup, Max Stassi at catcher. So it's kind of tough to love an Angels stack, like an Angels 5-man, because they just don't have that many good hitters. But I do like the mini stack of like Ohtani, Rendon, Walsh, or Fletcher, Ohtani, Rendon, something like that.
All right, let's move to Arizona. Gallen Wood, couple of guys in the 8K, mid 8K range. Are you getting much exposure to either of them on the mound?
I think Alex Wood is interesting just because he is facing a pretty weak Arizona team. He's also been very good at striking right-handed hitters out this year, which is important because Arizona's lineup, the top part at least, or the middle is predominantly right-handed. Towards the bottom, they ran a bunch of lefties out, but 2, 3, 4, and 5 will all be hitting right-handed against Wood. So far this season, he has a 28.2% strikeout percentage against righties, only a 13% strikeout percentage against lefties. And that's something that, going back years, he has not had the same strikeout numbers. So it's not great that the Diamondbacks have 4 lefties in their lineup, but I do still like that the middle of the order is right-handed, which is what Wood has had success against in the past. He's not getting a ton of ownership tonight. I think the price tag's about where it should be. So not my favorite pitcher, but definitely someone that I would expect to have in some tournament lineups.
All right, so if you're not getting to Gallen, are you looking at a stack then with San Fran first and foremost?
Not really. I think Zach Allen is a good pitcher. The reason I have trouble getting there is just that you're probably going to get a lot of lefties in the lineup for San Francisco, especially towards the top. Gallen's only struck out 21% of lefties this year compared to 33% of righties. He's still done a good job of limiting power, though. 0.081 expected ISO to left-handed hitters for Gallen. So I still don't really love the Giants. Like, you can look to Alex Dickerson if he's batting cleanup. He's pretty cheap. But overall, I just don't really like the offenses in this game.
All right, so moving on then, where maybe we can sneak in some more offense. We've got 2 left to get to. Live before lock with Eric and Terry coming your way. Eric Lindquist coming your way in a matter of minutes here. Frankie Montas just over the 8K. We've got Eduardo Rodriguez as well in Oakland. Late game, still a later game in Seattle. But let's start with the pitching matchup tonight, Adam.
Yeah, I really like Eduardo Rodriguez here. He's cheap. At the same. What'd you say?
Cheap, 7,400.
Yeah, he's at that same price point as Sonny Gray on DraftKings as an SP2. And while I think they're very similar in terms of their upside, if all things equal, all things aren't really equal here, because we know that Eduardo Rodriguez is capable of going 90 to 100 pitches if he's pitching well. It's pretty unlikely that Gray has that same upside, that same ceiling. So while I don't love the matchup against Oakland, I do think that the lack of uncertainty around Rodriguez's workload puts him ahead of Sonny Gray for me. He has been very good this year. Overall, he has struck out 27.5% of hitters, which puts him with the 5th highest strikeout percentage on the slate. 3.38 xFIP is like 2.5 runs better than his ERA. So you can see that he's gotten pretty unlucky, but that's not something we should expect to continue. The ballpark is favorable for pitching. Against righties in particular, he has a 27% strikeout percentage, only a 146 expected ISO allowed. He's going to be facing a right-handed heavy lineup for Oakland, but that's just not really concerning, given the fact that he's able to take care of righties. So I really, really like Rodriguez at this price tag.
Yeah, Oakland is so low owned, but they're so at the bottom, too, of our predictive stack model on the top stacks tools. Based off you just running with Rodriguez, I imagine you're going to stay away. Look, before even looking at Boston and the value there, is there anybody you anticipate getting to on Oakland, knowing that you're not going to stack them much, if at all?
No, I don't really think so. The hitting conditions aren't favorable, both in
Yeah.
terms of the park, and it looks like it's supposed to be about 60 degrees, so the ball's not really going to carry either.
Wow.
We know that the expanded foul territory in Oakland makes it, adds to the fact that it's really difficult to hit there. Not only is the outfield expansive, but a lot of foul balls get caught. So it's just not a favorable hitting environment, not favorable hitting conditions, not a favorable matchup. I'm not interested in the A's.
Not, and same with Boston. Same applies here with Boston.
Yeah, pretty much. Frankie Montas, I don't really like him as a DFS option tonight. I don't think he has that much strikeout upside here, but he's also still a pretty good pitcher, and the park still is not favorable. So
Right.
I still have trouble, getting to the Red Sox bats.
Last one, brother. All right, we're in Seattle, and we've got two guys in Gibson and Gilbert under 8K. So let's work at the workability with either one of these guys in that P2 slot, and then start some offense before we get out of here.
Yeah, so I like Logan Gilbert. The Rangers aren't very good, and Gilbert is just, a decent arm at 6,600 in a favorable pitcher's park. One thing, we just updated our ownership, and we now have Logan Gilbert at 27.7% owned on DraftKings with a 7.5% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. That does change the math a little bit from what we were seeing earlier. You're not getting, earlier he was projected to be low owned, and it was like, okay, I'm interested in Gilbert at that low ownership. Now, I still think he's fine, but not quite as appealing given that ownership. One other thing to keep in mind here with Gilbert is that he's had some issues with power this year. He's given up, in total, he's allowed 1.25 home runs per 9, but a 172 expected ISO to lefties, 252 to righties. He's struck out 30% of righties, only 22.8% of lefties. The Rangers are running out a lineup that has 4 left-handed hitters in the top 5, and then Adolis Garcia is the one righty who has a bunch of power from the right side. So it is kind of a scary lineup, and I do think that with Gilbert getting this ownership, it makes me really interested in mini stacks from the Rangers. Nate Lowe, Adolis Garcia, Joey Gallo, and 2K David Dahl hitting 2 through 5, I think actually does give you some upside here against a popular cheap pitcher.
Yeah, and both, when you look at Texas, coming in that under predicted at least 2% owned, so there's a lot of value on the board there as well, and nobody seems to be jumping on that, so that might be a really good end around, or at least counter to where people are piling up for other stacks. I don't imagine that's the same case with Seattle.
No, I'm not really interested in Seattle. I don't love Gibson here either. He's a pitcher that I think should get a lot more strikeouts than he does, because he just relies so much on a sinker that he shouldn't throw as often as he does. But that's beyond the point. He doesn't get a lot of strikeouts. Seattle is a good matchup, but he's expensive enough where I think there's just pitchers that have better strikeout upside than Gibson does. He's a good enough pitcher, though, that I'm not really looking to the Mariners' bats either.
I said, as we were talking earlier to start the show, about you watching iSniper and me living down there during the time of it. The next time we're on together, I'm going to give you a recap, right? You're going to hold me to that. That's tomorrow morning. You and I are back tomorrow morning for an NBA strategy show. So I've got homework tonight.
Yeah, I'll say, I guess I need to watch more iSniper tonight.
There you go. You and me. All right. Yeah. Thanks, brother. At Ship My Money DFS for Adam. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you to all of you. Leave us a like. Make sure you pound that like button. You subscribe to the channel. Live Before Lock with Eric and Terry coming up right now.
is going on, everybody? Welcome to the MLB Live Before Lock, presented by No House Advantage. I am Eric Lindquist. I am sitting sidecar here next to one Terry McBride. That is Digital B21 in the Twitter spheres. Terry, how are you doing this afternoon/night over there on the East Coast?
Doing pretty well, bud. It's been a interesting day, just going through a lot of baseball stuff. I was so deep in putting the lineups into my model here and getting stuff transferred over to Fantasy Cruncher just before that. Listening to the other show, I completely forgot we were about to go on air, so it kind of surprised me when the Zoom window popped up a minute ago.
Yeah, you get that Slack notification. Hi, where are you? Kind of one of those searches over here at the company. You got to be one person has to be late. We can't all be on time because that means that you are putting in the maximum amount of effort on the backside of this to be able to help everybody go win money. Correct?
That's it, exactly. And we're all putting in the maximum effort, but sometimes that maximum effort only involves just checking the schedule and finding out what time you have to be sitting right here, which is fairly easy, I guess. So it's not too much to complain about there. But
it's also super easy though. Just interject.
Yeah,
hitting the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell. So I should always be leading off with those such things. But continue on, Terry. I thought you were done for a second.
No, I was going to do a little transition into let's get out of my nonsense and just say it looks like a super interesting slate. But how you doing out there, man?
I'm doing good. We're gonna head on our so we live in Toluca Lake, which is basically Burbank here in Los Angeles. We're gonna go out to Venice just for the evening to go hang out there, celebrate a little 4th of July weekend early, and then on Sunday actually we got front row tickets to the Angels and Orioles game in the afternoon. For we're gonna drive down to Anaheim on Sunday. Obviously, two bad teams basically, but it's going to be Shohei Ohtani, and that's my fiance's gateway into baseball. So I'm going to do everything I can to keep baseball around in my life. So that's kind of it with me. But as I was saying, everybody getting in here, make sure you hit that like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell, so you know when this and all the other content at Awesemo is going live. We are being presented today by No House Advantage. They play player prop-based games, and we will talk about them a little bit later. But first, let's just get to it. Terry McBride, what are your first impressions of this slate as we're starting to dig in? What are you seeing? What do you think is very important? Because it is very interesting how diluted ownership is across the board today.
Yeah, it's a really, really broad-looking slate to me. There are just a lot of plays. I think that the pitching slate is one of the deeper slates we've seen. Yep. There's just a lot of teams with 2 and 3 starters, second and third starters in their rotation, going. We've got one true ace on the board in Max Scherzer. And for me, my personal projections, he's actually below a couple other guys, which is rare, just given that matchup against the tough Dodgers. So it's a really, really interesting pitching slate. And then the way that the site's priced everybody in basically the mid-range outside of a couple of options, it really creates some interesting situations around what you can roster with your hitting and your stack selection around those pitchers, and then whether or not you should. Like whether you're thinking about leaning into, all right, I'm grabbing a highly owned pitcher who's cheap, I can get to Coors bats with him. Well, is that the greatest idea? Those combinations going to be really broadly covered. So I think it's a really interesting slate just from a game theory, how to put this thing together perspective.
Yeah, and I would say DraftKings did not make it exactly cost prohibitive to be able to go into Coors Field and pluck off bats in a game with a 12 and a half total. So I'm definitely at a spot where I want to be getting away from that as much as possible. It doesn't feel good, and it's going to be nerve-wracking being out and about and looking at my phone and checking in what's happening with that game. But, I'm thinking just it's a flat-out cash thing where I think I'm going to have a cash lineup. I'm going to have one cash lineup I'm throwing out on DraftKings, and that's going to have all my Seattle exposure or St. Louis exposure for the evening and kind of moving around the board to other places. But if you're looking at the pitching slate, as you said, it is one of the more interesting pitching slates that I can ever remember on DraftKings. We have 28 starting pitchers, 14 games going on here, and the highest percentage for somebody for the top 2 pitcher percentage over here at Awesemo is 20%. I've never ever seen anything like this.
Yeah, it is very, very broadly stretched out, and it's even more stark on the FanDuel board because it's giving you just the probability of being the singular top pitcher, right? So yes, over there, exactly. And we're everybody's got to think of it relative from site to site. But looking at that board, you get Max at the top still. He's rated as our top potential starter, but he's carrying a 7.9 probability of being the top option. The next highest guys are in the 6s, and then the board, you can scroll most of the way down the board, and you're only getting into the 3s. Griff Canning is, let's call it 16 names down the list, 17 names down the list at 3.1. So there are a lot of guys. That is not much separation in terms of the percentage points that we're seeing of probability of success here. So when we say this is a broad slate, this is a broad slate. And that creates a lot of interesting opportunities in terms of a lot of these guys are going well under those low probabilities of being the top starter. So it's really interesting. A lot of moving parts on this board and just a lot of unique ways that you can put things together if you take a moment to think about it and be creative with it instead of just taking, like whatever the optimizer smashes together for you.
So on the top end, I know that you're a FanDuel guy. I'm a DraftKings guy here today for the most part. I'm still going to play a little bit of FanDuel with you, but you at the top end, you have Max Scherzer, you have Lance Lynn. Those are your two most expensive guys here on the board. And a lot of decision-making you're going to have in tournaments is figuring out what you're going to do with those two, because I think they definitely have, I would just flat out say that they have the highest upside. They've proven to have the highest upside day in, day out over the course of this season. But, 11K over on FanDuel, 10K over on FanDuel for each of them over on DraftKings, both rightfully getting to a lot of the ownership. I mean, Max Scherzer is really the only expensive guy at 10.5, everybody else sitting underneath 10K. But between those two, do you have a lean for FanDuel who you're going to be going to more?
For me, it would be more Lance Lynn. I'm getting him, higher projection and largely based on the matchup. He's just taking on that pathetic Tigers offense. And it's such a good spot that it just kind of outpaces the difference in any kind of ownership, any kind of salary there. Getting Lance Lynn in this spot for 10K for 10% ownership, I think that's a big bonus. I think there's a lot of room. He should be owned on a normal pitching slate. He'd be owned in the 20% range or probably higher in this spot. So it's just so broad that it's pulling some separation away. That's one of the spots I definitely want to hammer on and take advantage of. And looks like he's drawing 25 and change ownership on DK as my last update, which is a little bit more appropriate, but probably still low if you think about where he'd be in this matchup in a normal slate. So I really, really like that spot. Pitching
exactly.
Great, 5% strikeout rate on the year, 0.99 whip. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say, just kind of getting to Washington too. I mean, it cannot be stated enough how the Dodgers are starting to get back to full power. Like, they're just absolutely there, with the exception of Seager not being there. I mean, looking at this lineup, like, who do you really want to be picking on between Betts, Muncy, Turner, Bellinger, Taylor? I mean, they have basically the A team on the top end there. I mean, Pujols in the lineup would, Max Scherzer rates down righties, but Pujols doesn't strike out. I suppose that would be the one upgrade there, but Beatty doesn't really strike out that much, 18.9% K percentage on the season. But I mean, it's just a team that I don't see the amount of upside for the ownership being identical. You're looking at a Tigers team that against righties, it is just a stark difference between going to Dodgers and targeting them and targeting Detroit, which against righties, 26.3% K percentage, 92 WRC plus, 157 ISO. That just seems like, I don't know, everything else being equal, I think I would take Lance Lynn at the same salary. So give me the discount.
Yeah, absolutely. Those numbers that you just read off is exactly where I was going to go. Tigers second worst in baseball with that 26.1% strikeout rate against righties this season. That's so targetable. Their ISO and their 3.2 home run rate in the split are just in like the middle of the league, slightly below average. Create runs 7% below average, like you mentioned, by WRC plus. It's just a better spot overall. And yeah, the Dodgers are starting to get healthy. Before they were healthy, they're fifth best in baseball with a 22% strikeout rate against righties. They create runs 13% above average by WRC plus. They have a 170 team ISO and a 3.78% home run rate. It's just a tougher matchup. It is Max Scherzer. He's one of the best pitchers of his generation, not just on this slate. He is excellent. There is a very strong probability, and we have him ranked accordingly, that he puts up the biggest start of the night. It's just not the easiest spot. So That would be the one thing to say there.
Let's move the rest of the way down the board here. I would say another targeting point, if you want to just go to the mid-range, right off the bat, Eduardo Rodriguez gaining a bunch of ownership over on both sites. One Sonny Gray as well, $100 more over on DraftKings. We have pitch count concerns for him. We have how effective is he going to be after a AAA start where we didn't really get a lot to pull off from him. I don't really know where to go with Sonny Gray on this slate. He feels like an ultimate wild card. We have him as the second most likely pitcher to finish as a top two pitcher over on DK today. That was very surprising to me. I don't really feel confident about it, but also second most likely pitcher to finish as the top pitcher on FanDuel as well, 7K. I mean, how confident are you in Sonny Gray? And then kind of talking about Eduardo Rodriguez as well, who I think his underlying metrics are just phenomenal this season.
Yeah, Rodriguez is just a big enigma in terms of some of the numbers that come out of him in terms of what he's doing. He's just getting BABIP'd to death in certain spots. So he gives up runs and some of the back of the baseball card stuff isn't there. But then when you look at the underlying numbers, you're like, wow, this guy's actually pitching really well. So we'll come back to him in a second. But for me, on Sonny Gray, That's a major question mark. He projects fairly well for me because I've just got him in my model creating the innings projection that I normally get, which is like 5 and change. It's not an exact science with like how baseball does innings 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, reflecting the third of an inning. But so it's like a 5.5, let's call it, right? So he's got over 6.5 strikeouts, which was his over under. We were talking about that in Slack premium Slack just before I got on. So he's over his over under in strikeouts at over 6.5. But I just don't think we're going to get 5 innings and 5 and change innings, even less so out of him. I don't like it. He projects well for me. I love the price tag, but Sonny's not really a pitcher who's got a lot of trust from me anyway. When I know he's healthy, when I know he's going to put up 90 to 100 pitches, I still have shaky confidence with Sonny Gray based on some of the years he's had. So it's not for me. I'm probably going to come in under the field on him, I would imagine. Just based on how many other options are on the board. He does sit right in that group of, he's right next to like Taijuan Walker on my board, Lance McCullers on my board, Kyle Gibson, some of these other guys. Some of the other guys we'll talk about are above it. But I just don't want to go there when I've got such a major question mark on the innings and what it's going to look like. So I know the site's liking him a whole hell of a lot more, and hopefully the site's right and I'm wrong, and that will just prove Alex is better at this than I am once again, which doesn't need proving. But yeah, I won't be there on Sonny.
Yeah, I definitely try to always default to Alex as much as possible. But I think in the back of my mind, there just has to be, there's the natural concern that exists. And I think if the ownership were lower, if it was something where other people were uncertain about it, then maybe I would be going that direction. But I think that there's enough, I wouldn't call them pivots or anything. I mean, Sonny Gray, I think discernibly has the most upside. Him and Erod in that range just have the best strikeout stuff and have done it repeatedly for years. So I don't know. I'm kind of torn about it. I'm going to be torn about it leading all the way up to lock. But one thing you can do to help yourself out, to help make informed decisions, is getting the Awesemo Plus tools and content here for $29.95 for a weekly pass. It includes full access to all the premium content and tools at Awesemo.com, including player projections, ownership projections, our premium Slack channel, which Terry is on all the time, helping people out. He is, I got to say, the dude's just helpful out here, and he knows his MLB stuff. So make sure you're utilizing those features, because he is just one of the best at taking the time to help walk everybody, regardless if you're a brand new sub, if you've been in here for years, he is going to be there to help you. So check it out. Awesemo Plus Platinum, MLB Live Before Lock, all caps, one word. If you are a new user, you get 25% off of your first month. So definitely check that out as well. And if you just want to do MLB DFS, if you're just in here for the streets, I know some people are coming in from NBA, but $15.95 for the weekly package, that is good stuff. It is hard to find a better offer in the entire industry. So stop guessing, start winning. And yeah, $15.95, that's basically, your one single entry in a $20 or something like that. Devote that to making better lineups, to helping your investment go further and figure out how to make some top tier lineups. And today, I believe the free offering we have is MLB player rankings. So go check those out on the site as well. Those are good things. But anybody else that's kind of slipping through the cracks for you on pitchers before we get to stacks? Because I've got a couple guys that kind of stick out to me, and it gets a little bit uncomfortable in this mid-range, but I have some interest in going to Julio Urias at very low ownership. I think specifically over on FanDuel, where, if people have pitch count concerns for him, he's 8,900. He's kind of in that middle dead range where nobody else is really going to be landing with lineups. Maybe people will get up to Pablo Lopez as well, but he's another guy that I have some interest in. I just kind of want to get a little funky with my lineups over on FanDuel. What are you doing over there?
Yeah, I'm very much on board with the Julio Urias call. I like that spot a lot. He's pitching really well in terms of, he's projecting really well for me, pitching pretty well on the year as a whole. I'm getting to Kyle Gibson in that same range as a projection, so he's in that price range as well in his matchup against Seattle. I'm actually getting both of the pitchers in that game, and I wrote about them. Kind of a weird game to say that like this is a good spot for pitching with. Think Texas Seattle. It's really non-traditional, but I think both of these guys are in play. Gibson's not a big strikeout guy. He's an 18.3% strikeout rate average for his career, striking out 20.9% this year over 90 innings. So he's a little bit outperforming his career average and still well below league average. But he's taking on a Mariners team heavy on strikeouts, 25.9% on the season. They don't do a ton in terms of power, in terms of upside. So I think he's relatively safe. I don't know what the major upside for him is, but he's projecting fairly well. So for that price, he'll probably be in the mix for me. And then on the other side with Gilbert, he's taking on a Rangers team, 9th worst with a 24.9% strikeout rate against righties, below average 155 ISO, a 3.67 home run rate that's just around average. And they create runs 10% worse by WRC+. I really like Gilbert's profile in this matchup. 26.2% strikeout rate over his first 36 innings, induces a 12.6% swinging strike rate. He's at a 4.18 xFIP, a 5.4 walk rate, which is excellent. He's giving up a lot of premium contact, which concerns me with the guys like Joey Gallo, Adolis Garcia in this lineup. 10.1% barrel ball rate is high, 19.1 degree average launch angle, 45.5% hard hit rate. It gets concerning around that, but I think the strikeout upside's there. He costs $7,200 on FanDuel. He's a little risky, but I think there's GPP upside there for sure at that price. And he's another guy that helps you just pay for any bats that you want. And then on DK at $6,600, I don't even really care if he gets dinged for a home run or two at that price. He can definitely still give you a nice score at that price. So I think he's kind of sneaky interesting on the board. There are other guys in that range. It depends how long you want me to talk for. I could dive into JT Brubaker.
I'm very excited for it. No, I mean, I can interject on certain things. I would say I do for Logan Gilbert on FanDuel specifically, where we're seeing him around 10%. Give me the rest of the field where I can spread around guys for a little bit cheaper. I think he's in a great spot, but I was a little bit surprised to see righties. Texas only 24.8% K percentage. It's kind of middle of the pack. That's 12th worst in baseball. 91 WRC plus doesn't look great, but you're starting to see guys like Joey Gallo, Adolis Garcia kind of come alive here of late. And I just feel like Texas sitting there underneath 2%, they just have enough pop there that a guy like Gilbert, who looking at his hard hit stuff, he's just giving up a lot of hard contact here on the season, 45.5% hard contact, specifically looking at his splits to lefties here. He's given up a 1.15 whip. That looks great, but you start putting in some of that hard contact with a couple of the lefties, specifically Joey Gallo here. And I think just at his current ownership at 7,200, you can get to other pieces around it on FanDuel. I mean, Sonny Gray feels very risky to me as well, but he's 7K. He's actually cheaper. I think that nullifies a little bit of the risk. And then guys sitting a little bit more expensive, where I just think that there's pieces that we can get to get a little bit different on this slate. And as you said, 28 pitchers, nobody's got a crazy chance of being the top pitcher. I mean, Max Scherzer only 7.9%. Give me the guys who are going to be lesser owned on this kind of a slate.
Yeah, and that's a great way to look at it. And that's definitely a really sharp way to look at some of these value guys. And you're thinking in terms of, all right, what am I buying with that upside? And is there another guy who's owned at that similar kind of a price, like you're saying, where I can pivot, stay at the same price, get my value guy, and get away from even more ownership with the field? So it's also a slate, though, where I'm looking at it in terms of there are a lot of different spots to roster bats that are low owned here, too. So if I'm paying up to different bats or rostering bats in a bit of a different way, I don't really sweat the 10% ownership on a pitcher that can get to those bats. And when I'm comparing him with guys like Eduardo Rodriguez is the obvious comp, right? For 200 more, I can get Eduardo Rodriguez, who is a more proven, more talented pitcher right now. Gilbert might get there at some point in his career. He's a high-end prospect. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense to make that pivot. But I also think Oakland is a better offense. I think there's less strikeout potential on the board for him with Oakland. So there is that question mark in my head. So it comes out a little bit in the wash. But yeah, I totally agree with everything you said in terms of maybe at that ownership rate, it's a little bit harder of an ask to get to him in this spot.
So Kyle Tucker just got scratched. So get him out of your lineups as we're kind of talking about it. That is a big piece out of the Astros. I think that the 1 through 4 there, 1 through 5, even with no Yordan Alvarez, this lineup got a lot more watered down. It's not like I'm going to play Sam Hentges or however you say his last name. That was never going to be something that I do in my lifetime. But you take Kyle Tucker out of the 4 hole now, and it becomes Altuve, Brantley, Correa, and then a bunch of AAA dudes with Chas McCormick, Abraham Toro, Taylor Jones, Miles Straw, Jason Castro. So get Kyle Tucker out of your lineups. That's kind of sad because Houston was a team that, especially on that top half, I mean, we were seeing some massive leverage that you were getting earlier in the day. It started to level out a little bit here. Looking over at DraftKings, they're about appropriately owned, but God, now it's just going to be hard for me to get to that team. But that's kind of our segue into stacks here, Terry. Is there a team that sits on the board as we look at it? We'll obviously talk about Coors Field a little bit later here, but is there a team that you're looking at outside of Coors that is going to be a big part of your portfolio tonight?
Yeah, so I wrote up the Tampa Bay Rays in my column. They were popping for me in a big way, especially for power in terms of their home run upside in my power index, my home run model. So I think I'm going to be pretty overweight to the field on Rays. And they were drawing, it's weird, they're drawing negative leverage marks, but a lot of that weight is going into one hitter, and that's Brandon Lowe at the top of the lineup. On FanDuel in particular, he's up over 20%. I wouldn't leave him out of stacks because everyone else in this lineup is 10% or below. And once you get to the 5 spot, everybody immediately falls off. Everybody's around 1%. So there are ways to roster this team with clear upside. You don't get Mike Zunino on the back end, which I'm a little disappointed about. I just love rostering Zunino with his just ridiculous power. I was looking at his barrels per batted ball event. He is 3 full percentage points higher if you put him on the board because he doesn't actually qualify because he doesn't have enough batted ball events. But by barrel rate, he's 3 full percentage points higher than Shohei Ohtani this year, leading the league in barrel rate on batted ball per barrel ball event. He's just an amazing power hitter, but a true all or nothing guy. But he's not in the lineup. So anyway, so I'd be getting
life.
Yeah, exactly. And I wrote too much about him this afternoon for him not to be in the lineup. That's why I wanted to be. But I really like Austin Meadows here. He was my home run pick for the day. Definitely love the power upside there. Wander Franco, premium prospect, still only costs $3,000 on the FanDuel slate. People aren't getting to him because he hit 1 home run his first day up. He's got a couple nice little running stats, including 2 stolen bases, some runs, and some RBIs. But his triple slash is 194, 306, 323. Now that's over 36 plate appearances. People do still know him, but they're not going to him here. So I love that spot. Randy Arozarena, not the superstar that people were forecasting coming out of the playoffs last year, but certainly some upside, 11 stolen bases, 10 home runs on the year. No ownership on him in the heart of that lineup. So I really like the spot for the Rays here going up against Manoah, who gives up a pretty significant contact profile, 10.4% barrel rate, 16.8 degree average launch angle. The hard hit rate is not immense, so he's managing to hit the fat part of the bat, but still not give up massive power the other way. So it's an interesting profile that way. But I think this team gets the bat on the ball the right way. Austin Meadows in particular is just a home run hitter. His swing profile is perfect to hit a home run off of Alek Manoah here. So I really like that spot.
So Ryan Nelson in the chat says, Eric will be fading his Twins tonight. You're damn straight I won't be. That is not something I will be doing whatsoever. If we're talking about top stack potential in this slate, Minnesota, third, 5.8% over on DraftKings, only being owned with a 2.8% ownership share. I understand that they have been bad as a baseball team, but it is not at the behest of their hitting. Like, they have absolutely still smoked the ball up and down the lineup. And not only that, but it's so easy to know who the guys are going to be. And they just don't seem like they're garnering the same amount of ownership that would get me away from going to this team on this spot. Brady Singer, not a guy that I'm really ever like, how could you possibly be afraid of anything that Brady Singer is doing outside of the fact that he has limited hard contact, 34.6% on the entire season, 6.5 degree launch angle, only a 23.2% K percentage. But my God, you get Josh Donaldson back in the mix here, 52.1% hard hit percentage. Nelson Cruz, even more, 54.9. Max Kepler, Alex Kirilloff, all these dudes up and down the lineup. I just think that they're going way underrepresented, and I've been waiting for a time to be a homer. This is finally like the first day that I felt comfortable rostering this team, and I don't know, forever. It's 85 degrees. It's one of the better hitting environments, and if I'm looking for upside to beat Coors, I think you've got the bats to do it here in Minnesota.
Yeah, I really like the spot here as well. If I hadn't written up the Rays in like the full team profile where I go into each hitter, I would have written up the Twins. They still got a little section where I called them out by name and just profiled the spot a little bit. To your point, Singer, 23.2% strikeout rate, a 4.12 xFIP. He's around the league average pitcher right now, puts too many guys on base with a 1.49 whip. It's all about his ability so far to limit hard contact, stay out of trouble. But this is a power-packed home run hitting team. They are fourth best with a home run rate against right-handed pitching, 4.28% on the year, 187 team ISO, strikeout just 22.7% of the time. They're going to be putting the ball in play. They're going to be hopefully hitting the ball over the wall, and they're not owned. I really like this spot, and they're not that expensive either, particularly on the FanDuel slate. You get Nelson at $3,900, but everybody else $3,400 or below. Josh Donaldson coming in as the $3,400 guy. Similar on DK. Both Nelson Cruz and Josh Donaldson are over $5,000 over there, but everybody else is affordable. So I don't really know what's keeping the public off of this stack, but I'm happy they're not on.
I got to say also, we just got J-Ram. Jose Ramirez just got scratched as well here. I don't know what's going on, but we're losing all the good hitters right off. There's a million good hitters on the slate. I'm not worried about that. But J-Ram was one of my favorite one-offs of the day. Third base has been kind of down as a position as a whole. I thought Nolan Arenado, 5,800. He's kind of coming in lower owned because of that price point, but wasn't a guy that I was really going to get too much in any of my St. Louis stacks. I'm a little bit lower on Coors. We'll get there next. But get Jose Ramirez out of your lineups now too. Pretty nuts to lose him and Kyle Tucker in the same game here. That just kind of significantly lowers my interest in anything on that side for that game. Does that change anything for you whatsoever? Would you have more interest in McCullers at this point?
Maybe that's actually intriguing because I was getting a decent projection on him. He's like he's above the middle of my board. Let's put it that way. So he was in the mix. I just didn't really have him under that much consideration given the salary and the way the salary compares with some of the guys we've already talked about who I have projected higher than him. But that does take the best bat out of that lineup for Cleveland. They do have Franmil coming back, adding some power into the middle of the lineup. They've got Bobby Bradley and his big power upside. But around those two guys, there's not that much. Like, I think Austin Hedges is a sneaky, interesting power bat at catcher sometimes, but he's at the bottom of the lineup. He's hitting 157, 214, 264 this year. That's not a guy who's going to scare you. Ernie Clement, I'm pretty sure that's a guy they transported from like 1890s baseball. Harold Ramirez doesn't scare anybody. So Ahmed Rosario's an underrated player. Like, if you were looking for a third man to build a Cleveland stack with, I would do like Rosario, Bradley, and Franmil, but I don't think there's a ton of upside in Cleveland bats. And yeah, it makes McCullers probably a little bit more appealing.
So Tyler, look at this. Look at the production value that's showing up here. Just pulling up Baseball Savant like it's his job. Well, I guess it is kind of his job, so there's that. But hey, you know what? Fantastic job here, Tyler. As you're looking at this board, I mean, I'm looking at the exact same thing here on my page, and you're seeing a guy in Ernie Clement who strikes out at a 6.7% clip. That is low, so that's not exactly super exciting. I don't know who the guy that they're going to be inserting into that lineup is going to be at the moment. I will go back and kind of refer to it. Let's go unhide non-starters. We'll find out.
The new one came out, but I didn't take note of which guy was it.
So Clement does not strike out. So that's unfortunate. So we're probably not going to be going that direction as much. 6.7% strikeout rate. I mean, it's a very limited sample, so don't get me wrong. 30 plate appearances. So I'm not going to lose my mind over it, but seems like a slap happy individual who's going to just get the ball in play, unfortunately. Bad times for Lance McCullers. So I was looking to jam a little bit. Probably not going to be going that direction whatsoever anyway. Anybody else that you're kind of like really looking at on the lower end of stacks? Because I've got a couple that I mean, you can go so many different directions on this slate, but I have to say the Baltimore Orioles are a team at this top half of the lineup. We've started to see some of the power potential, starting with Mullins, Mountcastle, all these dudes on the top half, going into Los Angeles here. Not the best hitting environment and not the best ballpark there in Anaheim, but we know the kind of potential that exists at the top of this lineup. And Griffin Canning, not really panned out. The guy did not pan out the way that they expected. 411 slugging here, 39.2% hard hit percentage. Just doesn't do anything very well. And I think Cedric Mullins, Austin Hayes, Anthony Santander, Ryan Mountcastle, Trey Mancini, whoever ends up in the top half of that lineup, playing in the outfield, definitely interest there as 5-mans, 3-mans. I'm going to be mix and matching them kind of everywhere. Anybody that really sticks out for you as a lower owned stack?
That's an interesting one, actually. They weren't completely on my board, but just looking at the prices in that Orioles lineup, the average price in the projected lineup anyway is around 2,500, and everyone except for Cedric Mullins is under $3,000 on FanDuel. Or excuse me, Trey Mancini is also $3,000, so easily affordable spot. I like that. That's an interesting one. I think just looking at our top stacks board for both sites, it looks like the Blue Jays are going a little bit on their own. So that's kind of an interesting spot, just a premium offense. If people aren't on premium offenses, it's usually something that I'll just kind of no-brainer click them and make sure that they're in my exposures and getting enough room to work, at least in Fantasy Cruncher. Looks like similar story with the Giants. They're a little bit under-owned in terms of their probability of success. So you get some positive leverage on San Francisco here. So they could be interesting. Going up against Zach Gallen, who I do think is a pretty good pitcher overall, but they've just been very good, the Giants, in terms of their power upside and their run creation so far this year. So I can get to some Giants in this spot here as well, particularly when they're under-owned. It makes them an interesting stack. I'm just looking for them on my board here. Yeah, 4.33% home run rate against righties so far this season, second best in baseball. 194 team ISO against righties is best in baseball. They strike out heavily, 26% strikeout rate. No arguing with that. I think that's third worst now in baseball against righties, but they still create runs 9% better than average. If people aren't really going to be there heavily, and it doesn't look like people are, except for around maybe Mike Yastrzemski, I'm happy to roster this Giants team.
They've just been so surprisingly good. It's just kind of stupid at this point in time. What, 109 WRC plus against righties there? Why not? Like, why not San Francisco in just about every single spot here? Going up against, I mean, it's another great spot against Zach Gallen here. 8,800 too. I mean, it's not like I'm going to be rostering Zach Gallen. No leverage to be had, but such is life. I really like that call. I'm going to be adding a little bit of them. So you can add a couple Orioles, I'll add a couple Giants, and we'll win all the money on FanDuel tonight. I'm excited for such things.
Sounds like a plan, man. Maybe we weave those stacks together. Somebody out there right now is putting those two stacks together and going to finish at the top of the standing. Probably grabbing a pretty good pitcher with it too, because there are some cheap prices in those lineups.
Lance Lynn, baby. Loco. I gotta just let it be known. We got El Negro Loco in the chat. He's doing all the weather things for us. I don't see any kind of an issue right now. Tart coming back on here at Yankee Stadium, so it looks like we're headed for a delay. We shall see. Yeah, it's likely going to start in a delay here. I will let Loco be the one who kind of tells us what to be doing in that direction here. I don't know. It looks like it's going to be late here. I didn't have a ton of interest, as much as you can for the Yankees. I mean, you have the normal interest in a guy like Stanton who can hit the ball high. He can hit the ball far, do the things that he does. But I don't really want to pick on Taijuan Walker or Jordan Montgomery. And I also don't want to be rostering guys in a game that may or may not be in a spot. So I'm writing that entire game off. What are you going to be doing with the Yankees game here?
I am about, let's call it 10 miles southwest of Yankee Stadium as the crow flies. And when we started talking on this show a little while ago, it was a little overcast and nasty looking out. And now I'm looking out the window across the room and it is pouring. It looks like a shower.
Okay.
Not all that optimistic. I'm not sure what the behind the scenes radar is. I didn't get a chance to give it a quick look at the end of the day. So it would depend for me on what the rest of that radar looks like. I like to let the DFS weathermen play DFS weatherman. I like to leave things in until the last possible second, but I will say it is not looking promising outside right now.
I am just clicking remove. That is awfully useful. Yeah, that seems like I don't really see a reason on a 14 game slate. I mean, I know the power potential that exists in this Yankees lineup. Sure, you can go get them at 0.5%. I'm just not going to do it. I think if it were a 6 or a 7 game slate, I'm more inclined to go way over the field in a spot like that just to get massive leverage on a spot like this. But because there are so many other spots to be going, I don't know if I really need to be going that direction. If you still got to some shares, I would make sure that I made it a full stack in the event that they went for 12, 13 runs and you just burn that lineup into infinity. But on this slate, I'm not really seeing a reason to be doing that. But I like that you are able to play weatherman for us, because yesterday, we were talking to Adam and I were doing a show together talking about how we always text our parents. Like my family, they end up in Minneapolis a lot for games. And so I always text them, hey, what's it like? Is it humid? Is it like whatever else? As if I can't just go on weather.com and figure out what's going on. And he always texts for the Nationals updates. And that seems a little bit more important, but much appreciated. Man of many talents, Terry McBee.
Yeah, it's including looking out the window. That was a tough one.
I was going to say, it's kind of dark in your room today. Maybe that was part of it. I thought the clouds were maybe coming on in. But
yeah, a little bit. No outside light coming in. The other thing to keep in mind about that, too, is the Yankees operating as the Yankees do have no issues running a doubleheader on a Saturday or 4th of July weekend. So keep that in mind. This is also the Crosstown Mets. All the fans live here. There is no issue rescheduling this one for tomorrow. It's not like it was the other night with the Angels, where the Angels had to fly out to play a 6 o'clock game in California the next day. So bear that in mind when we think about whether or not this one gets PPD'd.
Love it. Before we get to Coors Field talk, that's going to kind of be the dessert course, I think, for us here this evening. Let's talk a little No House Advantage here quick, because they are the presenting sponsor and they deserve the time. They deserve a lot of things. They are putting out a really fun product. If you can go play today, they have the $1,000 Grand Slam with 500 to first. A little top heavy, and it's nice because these are 10 props that you were playing that you can simply click props, play them on in. They have exclusively peer-to-peer on NBA, MLB, NFL, and PGA, all for cash prizes. It's a level playing field. You basically don't have to be competing against the sharks like you do for traditional DFS sites. They offer over 500 player props, making it the largest provider of player props throughout the industry. And the best part is all new users get a $20 deposit bonus when they use the promo code Awesemo. AWESEMO. It's on the bottom bar. You can definitely figure that one out. But NHA now has mass entry capability and big prize pools, just like other DFS sites. It's not going to be that big of a transition. So beat your friends, not the house. Download in the App Store and win big with player props today. Something that I've been utilizing, if you click over on some of these players, there's a number of them that have 1.5 hits. I'm looking at Nolan Arenado at the very top. 1.5 hits is basically him going 2 for 4. And I'm not saying that he can't be going 2 for 4 or 2 for 5 in that spot, but over a log sample, playing him in a spot where he's got to be hitting 500 feels like a negative EV structure. I think you can find batters in better spots be taking some unders on them 1.5, but you also have players like Josh Donaldson also at third base there. who over a 0.5 hits. I love taking some overs on the 0.5 hits over on NHA. I feel like that's a really solid way to go, especially against a guy like Brady Singer. He's hitting in the 2-hole. All you're looking for is the one for 4 day. It's 250. Pretty realistic there. Terry, do you feel pretty good about doing something like that similarly? Are you able to play some NHA where you're at?
I don't think I have access to NHA. Last I checked, I don't. When they were as a sponsor, when they came on board, I think I jumped on there and tried to launch and didn't get in based on living in New Jersey. I might be thinking of one of the other ones, though, to be quite honest. They run together, but I love what NHA does, so I would like to get in there because it's really cool. It's cool that they decided, hey, we're going to run a prop-based contest and immediately came out of the gate as the #1 prop provider in the industry. That's pretty cool. So they're filling a really nice space, and I like how their game works. And I really like that call. And you mentioned that the other day when we were doing one of these shows. That half a hit is a really cool little prop to chase because guys just got to come through once. And when you're getting the guys at the top of the lineup like that, you're getting those extra plate appearances. I would be looking to maybe go to road teams more frequently than home teams if you're doing that. Same idea. You're getting those extra plate appearances potentially in the top of the 9th inning if they're winning. Or if they're losing rather. So I think it's a really good call.
And on my board today, so I've been trying to put a spreadsheet together because I do want to be getting over there for some MLB contests. My favorite play on the entire board, if you want to be looking for somebody in your 10 confidence point slot, Christian Walker, 1.5 hits. Give me the under on such things. Batting in the 4-hole for Arizona, going up against Alex Wood. Yes, it's a righty against a lefty here, but yes, San Francisco is going to come in, but only 4 implied runs here. Christian Walker, not a guy that has been playing that well here of late. I like kind of targeting him. Currently an expected batting average of 257 on the season, 243 for his career. So I definitely like the less on 1.5 hits there. But let's get ourselves on to Coors Field. Let's talk about the big spot that everybody wants to talk about, and rightfully so. There's a massive total here. St. Louis, by far the top stack percentage, 16.2%. Colorado second, 8.6%. I got to say, I kind of have my apprehensions on both sides. St. Louis more from an ownership perspective where, I have 84% of the field that would be kind of going towards that I can allocate to different stacks just by not being super heavy. I'm sure I'll have some unique St. Louis combinations here over on my FanDuel lineups. On DraftKings, I'm just going to be kind of staying away. What are you doing with St. Louis?
I will probably be under the field on St. Louis. Okay. It's typically how I end up on these core slates where the teams are explosively popular. That said, based on the low ownership that we're projecting for Tommy Edman, Paul DeJong at the back end of the lineup, I might grab some of the shares where I can put that together, where I'm grabbing like Edman DeJong or Edman Yachty and putting them with O'Neill, Goldschmidt, Renato O'Neill, and trying to build it like that. It's not like nobody's going to be doing that, but the way that those guys are individually projected, they're at least lower. If you wanted to grab a 2-man, I mean, it's difficult to not just go to the power hitters and to the excellent hitters in Arenado and Goldschmidt. But yeah, some of the numbers that this team has put up, the power for at least O'Neill and Arenado is there. O'Neill in particular has an excellent home run rate on the season. Goldschmidt's been in a slump. So you're talking about a team that's kind of been underperforming. You're going here for the ballpark. They're priced up. They're super popular. It's a difficult ask. I hate Coors games, to be honest. I'm almost always going to be getting away from them unless it's a situation where one of the teams is going under-owned. That's typically the Rockies, but they don't look that way today to me. So this is more of a stay-away spot. But to look at the Rockies through a similar lens, I think Tapia is maybe a little bit under-owned up top on both sites. I think Charlie Blackmon on DK, because you're paying 55 for him, is definitely under-owned at 4.5%. And then you could tie Blackmon, Brendan Rodgers, and CJ Cron. And I would even throw Ryan McMahon on the back end of that maybe as a later lineup option on the DK slate. Those guys are lower owned on FanDuel, but I still don't love going to that. They're owned in like the mid-teens. But that would be the way to attack those guys. Trevor Story, super high owned. Garrett Hampson, super high owned on DK, given the 4,000 price. He's a 257, 308, 437 hitter. He's got 12 stolen bases. He's managed to hit 6 home runs this year, but he profiles more as a hit tool and speed kind of a guy. So I feel like that's just heavy ownership on him. So I'd be looking into the low-owned individuals and seeing the way that you can string them together. If I'm building stacks here, maybe I'm grabbing some of the lower-owned guys as one-offs or like 2-man combos.
Yeah, I'm not going to be playing Colorado at all today. I will have some St. Louis. I think it's pretty easy for me to – I want to take my Colorado exposure and spread it out to some other places and kind of my case for it. One, it's not like they're going completely unowned by any means. Again, you can probably find a way to get leverage up over top of it. But the ownership is there. I mean, right now, 11.2% ownership share on DK, only 8.6. And a lot of the reason is people look at Oviedo and they just say right off the bat, Johan Oviedo, 5.23 ERA, 1.58 whip, 11.3 walk rate, which can get him in a lot of trouble. But he has some pretty drastic splits, and 22 strikeouts and 90 plate appearances to righties. That grades out to around 24%, as opposed to just 13 in 108 plate appearances against lefties. That's a 12% strikeout rate. If I went to Colorado at all, I would have to be focusing on the lefties, and these lefties are just not very good by any means. I mean, Charlie Blackmon's not been up to snuff. Looking at the back half of this lineup here for Colorado, it gets a little bit dicey. You get Elias Diaz in the backside. Ryan McMahon, the lefty that I would want to play to get different, is in the 7 hole today. So, I mean, you're neutralizing guys like Hampson, Story, Rogers, Crone, all the bats that I would want to be going towards. I think that there is some more strikeout upside for Johan there. I'm not going to play him on DraftKings. He's $25 on Yahoo. If you want to get weird, that's the minimum price for pitchers over there, and he's just drastically the lowest price to do it on the slate. But a 73 WRC plus for Colorado here, a 144 ISO against righties, not my favorite spot to be targeting Colorado.
Yeah, in terms of run creation, that mark that you just mentioned, their WRC plus against righties, is by far the worst run creation in all of baseball. So you are buying into, if you're rostering Rockies here, the worst possible offensive spot in all of baseball. So know that when you roster Rockies, even though they're at Coors Field, they're going to be popular. If you're walking into their popular bats, you're doing it in a bad spot, even though it's the good park. It's not a great pitcher against them. What I will say for Oviedo, 7.4% barrel ball rate is a little higher than you'd like to see. 7.1 degree average launch angle means guys are hitting line drives and ground balls. He's got a 30.4% hard hit rate that sits in the 90-something, I just had it in front of me, 91st percentile of the league, 86th percentile average exit velo. So the barrel ball rate that I said was it's 56th percentile, so it's slightly above average. The expected slugging is ugly, 27th percentile expected slugging percentage. But he's just learning how to pitch in the show, too. He's a well-regarded prospect, 95-mile-an-hour heat, so he's got good, reasonable stuff that should profile better as he develops. So he's a kid they're actually thinking could be a decent major league pitcher for him. I'm not advocating to go to him here in Coors Field by any means. He projects under 10 FanDuel points for me on the day. So despite the 5,600, I wouldn't go there. But he could certainly limit those Rockies bats like you were talking about. And yeah, the lefties outside of Charlie Blackmon and the batting order spot on Ryan McMahon, you're absolutely right. It's just not a spot I want to go to.
Oh, I made a good point to Terry McBride. My day has been made. Oh my God. What is wrong with, I'm just so happy. It's unbelievable. All right. We got a couple of things. So Yanks game is officially delayed. So I am bye-bye to that one. We're just saying bye-bye. Mets, Yankees delayed due to rain. Thank you so much, Loco, my guy. We also have to give him his top FanDuel cash game pitcher on the day. He's rocking some cash. He needs to know things. I picked Lance Lynn. I think there's a case to be made for Erod. There's a case to be made for Scherzer as well. I think Lance Lynn, just a 10K, I can get the bats that I would want to on FanDuel. I'm not going to play cash there today, but what would you do, Terry McBride? Who would be your one ride or die guy in cash?
Yeah, dangling over the pit of deadly vipers. If I had to pick one, it would be Lance Lynn. But for cash, based on the price tag, at least, I would definitely throw Eduardo Rodriguez into that mix. Those would have been the two names that I would have said there as well. I think you're dead on about those two guys. You just gain so much from that price tag with Rodriguez that I think it makes some sense because you're going to be able to roster a bunch of those premium bats that kind of play well for cash lineups. So that would be the consideration around it, but I don't think you go wrong either way.
As we're getting down to the end here, let's talk for one quick second about the MLB player props tool, which is just a really, really cool new thing that we have here at Awesemo. If you're able to bet props, if you're in a state where you're able to be betting props, if you're in Vegas where you should definitely be betting props and then going out and having an absolute blast with your life, MLB prop tool strikeouts, MLB prop tool home runs, check out all the goodies that we have over there. If you're going to be putting together some of these strikeout props, they have been so profitable with the expected ROI, the expected win percentage. Right now, the top on the board, Pablo Lopez over 5.5, minus 105 there, 34% expected ROI. You can click on Odd Shopper to be able to go shop your odds, find the best spot in the industry to be able to put together a great positive EV bet right out of the gate. Alex Wood, the next one on the board, over a 5.5. They're starting to level out. Some of these strikeout props have dropped to a place where you're looking at some overs on guys like that with the spin concerns. You're looking at some overs as possibly becoming the new profitable strategy because they've been so skewed down. I mean, I believe the highest prop line on the entire board today, Max Scherzer 7.5, given he's going up against the Los Angeles Dodgers. So that makes a lot of sense. Pretty good line sitting there. You can kind of see that expressed on the tool as well. But it's a great spot to see if there's maybe people who are being overvalued or undervalued in the industry. I think Lopez and Wood are two guys that are being maybe a little bit underrated for their performance here. If you're not going to play them in DFS, go ahead and make some individual bets, but definitely be checking in with that because that is an amazing new offering that we have here at Awesemo. All right. If people, go ahead.
Hey, just for the record, I have Lopez projected for 6.13 strikeouts. I have Wood at 6.10, so both over, and I have Scherzer at 5.89, so he's under.
Ooh, so maybe a little bit of an under. I mean, that Dodgers lineup, there's just not a ton of Ks that are going to be had. Traditionally, righties going up against the Dodgers for the season, 22% K percentage, that's second best in baseball, second worst, I would say, for the pitcher in that perspective. 117 WRC plus against righties. Not a team I'm going to be picking on. And again, I'm a little bit lower on Scherzer as a result. Totally understand the upside. If he was being
haircut in my projections.
Yeah, it's I love that you just said that. Again, we're kind of in lockstep today. This is going to go very well or very poorly for both of us. So looking forward to such things. But yeah, definitely be checking out that player props tool. We got a super chat here from Darko Novakovic. I think I got that right. Darko. What's up, dude?
Darko a customer support email this morning, I think. So if it's about that, I think we took care of you.
Beautiful, beautiful. We've got two super chats, guys. I missed one from CTJ as well, but we'll start with Darko. Top DraftKings pitchers for cash.
It would probably be, I'm just pulling up, switching over to the pricing there. I think it's probably two of those same guys that we said before, Lance Lynn and Eduardo Rodriguez. Rodriguez, same price on DK and FanDuel today. I know you're walking into a little bit more ownership there, but I don't really sweat that for cash. So I think it's probably just the same answer, Lance Lynn and Eduardo Rodriguez. Would you see it any differently?
Nope, those are the two. I think they're coming in with the most ownership. I think Eduardo Rodriguez has basically been running so bad this entire year because everything from his underlying metrics looks fantastic to me. So I'm just going to kind of trust what I see with that. Plus the ownership's already there. So play the two guys with the most ownership in that spot. I think those are my two guys as well. And then the next spot that we have, we've got CTJ, $5 super chat. Ooh, let's go. Mancini or Mountain Goat, and then Perez or Santana, and then also Grandal ? So, I mean, I guess we're kind of like going down the line. Mancini or Mountain Goat?
Let me jump over to that. I'm going by my home run mark. I'll give it that. I get Mancini. Mancini at 12.14, Mountcastle at 10.87.
Gotcha.
Mancini slightly higher projected for a DFS projection. So I would go that route. I like them both.
Perez or Santana?
Which Perez and which Santana?
My guess is Sal Perez versus Carlos Santana, but that's just an inference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Good job by you landing on that.
Thank you.
Just trying to get. I would usually I like both of those hitters as well. I would usually say it's probably Sal Perez, both based on the premium position that he plays. If you're playing on DraftKings, where you have to roster a catcher. But I do like Carlos Santana's bat. I think he's underrated and typically slips below on ownership. And yeah, based on the ownership projection that we've got on those two guys, I'm going to say it's Carlos Santana. He's projected under 5%. Sal Perez over 15% on both sites. So that makes a major difference for me.
Love it. All right. Any other questions? Get them loaded on up here in the
Wasn't
chat.
there one
here.
more on that one?
Oh, he did have one more. He just said Grandal ? I mean, you can always play Yasmani Grandal as a one-off in spots. I mean, the guy. Traditionally, I do like targeting him more from the left side of the plate. 14 homers here on the season. The bat has definitely woken up here in spots of late. He had the double home run game against Minnesota 2 games ago. That was unfun for me watching that thing. I don't know why I do those things to myself. 13-3 beatdown that was. So Yasmani Grandal, you can always play as a one-off.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that bat. I love the power upside in it. I know he's at 186, 388, 441 on the back of the baseball card. The on base there is spectacular. He's got a 254 ISO on the season. He's creating runs 34% better than average. So if people are sweating a 186 batting average, don't. It's not old school baseball anymore. The guy is walking 24.5% of the time. He gets on base like crazy. That helps with run creation, guys. So it's not always about hitting home runs. but Yachty also does hit home runs. Love the guy.
Love
Trade
it
performance
too.
season long in my dynasty league, actually. We use OPS over there.
Hey, Muncy woke up. Remember when I was bashing Muncy earlier this season?
Yeah.
Those were good times. Yeah, things are changing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's incredible.
And in an OPS league, Yachty's got a lot of value.
Yeah, it took a little bit of while. Yeah, he definitely does as well. Let's see. We had another question. I was going to say these 3v3s, I never know the context because one, we don't have a site. Two, we don't have any idea, but I mean, Goldie and Altuve versus Freeman and Rogers versus Abreu and Muncy. I don't know if that's for cash games, single entry tournaments, if that's going to be on DraftKings or FanDuel or Yahoo. So if you want to have some specifics there, we can more accurately help you figure out what you want to do. What do you think about a Pittsburgh stack today? That's a question from David Herrer in the chat.
Pretty much the same thing I think about a Pittsburgh stack on most days, which is it's not a strong spot. They've got a few hitters that I do like in that team, in that roster, but you're talking about a team overall that's just not good in terms of run creation, in terms of power, in terms of really anything that we're looking for here. What they do well is not strike out. I actually get a decent projection on Adrian Hauser today just because the way that my model looks at the matchups, it credits teams that are not good offensively and not ignores the opposing strikeout rate because it's baked into my strikeout projection for the pitcher, but it's not as big a deal. So I am getting a good opposing projection for the pitcher. I don't like this lineup really at all. You're talking about a team that's 15% worse than average creating runs against right-handed pitching. They've got a 2.43% home run rate that's tied for worst in baseball with the Diamondbacks in the split. It's just not a good spot. Could it go off today? Sure. Any given day? Sure. But it's not for me.
Same here. We got Aaron Pfaff. He just said favorite SP2 DK cash games. I think the guy is Erod. And then if you want to be playing that goober in Seattle, I mean, he's a good arm. I should give him the respect to Gilbert, should I say. He would be all right, but I think it's got to be Erod and then Lance Lynn on the top end.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. And when in doubt, when you're making that kind of a choice, as far as like the Gilbert Erod decision, it makes a lot of sense to sometimes do something as simple as I'm going to go with the talented, experienced guy who's been in the major leagues for a while. It's maybe a less numbers-based and analytical way to look at things, but sometimes that does work. Sometimes that is a good tiebreaker. Just go with some experience. A guy knows how to pitch in the league.
Love it. Love it. We're going to keep it moving here. Bellinger on third on DK 3,600. Yeah, he's a guy you should probably be rostering at 3,600 in tournaments. Obviously, Max Scherzer, he's got a fly ball issue. He can give up some one-offs here and there. If 3,600 were to just open up in my outfield, that's an okay number to be clicking on for him. What do you think about him as a one-off?
Yeah, I'm always happy to get to Cody Bellinger. So you mentioned it. You're talking about in not the greatest matchup because of the opposing pitch. But this is one of the best overall hitters in baseball. He's underperformed so far this year, 220, 343, 366 triple slash, but he's creating runs a mere 2% above average and a 146 ISO. That's not him. This is a guy that we've seen perform at the absolute top level of the sport. So when you can get him at a discount, absolutely fire away. And that always applies when I can get a star at a discount and not that much ownership. Absolutely plug and play.
Somebody asked earlier, what do you think about a Milwaukee stack today?
Let me pull them back up. I was just on.
I think I had like 2% of them on FanDuel or something like that. It was a very 2% that I have of them. I just don't really think that they are. I think on FanDuel they're okay. It's just not a team you should be prioritizing whatsoever.
Yeah, and it's not a loaded lineup in any way. Like there's just not enough sequential hitting. There's not enough upside in terms of power there. I like getting to Christian Yelich one-offs when he's 3,800 and 3.3% owned on FanDuel. I'll say that much. Based on the same principle with Cody Bellinger, you're getting to a superstar at a discounted price and discounted ownership. As a stack, I don't really like it. Who are we putting with Christian Yelich? Willy Adames is the next best player in this lineup, and that's not saying
much. That's not useful.
Not for me,
Yeah, I'm going to probably be passing on that as well here. We got 5 minutes here leading up to lock. What do we got here? Joe Maddon smoking a doob? Maybe. He kind of looks like he would enjoy such things. Didn't he have an RV that he was traveling around with when he was with the Cubs? I think I saw that one time. I feel like I saw that on like a Baseball Tonight report for like a Sunday night game that they had going. He seems like an interesting dude you'd want to have a beer with for sure.
Absolutely.
Maybe not the best manager on planet Earth, but that's a completely different thing. He's one of the better ones. I don't know. I'm not going to.
I think he's got some interesting ideas of an interesting approach to the game, at least.
How about this one? So we haven't even talked about either of these guys yet. Drew Smyly or Alex Wood. Who do you have more of tonight?
It's probably going to be Wood just because Smyly wasn't really on my radar in terms of when I was looking at the slate at all. It's Wood, but I'm not going to have a ton of Wood either, I don't think. I like the spot for Smyly was a guy who, when I was looking at things just before we got on the show, I noted, wow, I didn't get to any Smyly in just like how I was thinking about the slate when I was writing it, when I was considering options. 7,900, I really like the price. I love the matchup going up against the Marlins. They're a fairly hapless lineup. They do get to lefties a little bit better, but it's nothing to really fear here. He's just not performed all that well. 4.96 xFIP on the season, 1.32 whip, putting too many guys on base, only striking out 19.7% of hitters. So I just question the upside on such a broad slate with so many other options that I want to get to in that similar price range. So for me, it wasn't really coming up, and Wood is a little bit stronger than that. So I would get to Wood in that either or.
So Joaquin Portillo, this is probably going to be directed at me because I wrote the Yahoo article today for the MLB Yahoo Cup, round 15 today it is. So definitely check that out. That'll be out every single Friday for their Yahoo competition. But he said Yahoo stacks. St. Louis is very, very cheap over there comparably. Before, I really liked the Astros, but now you're taking Kyle Tucker out of that lineup. You're taking Yordan Alvarez out of that lineup. So I'm much lower on them. I think my favorite leverage stack to be going to is Tampa Bay. I'm in lockstep here, I think, with the Tampa Bay talk that we had from Terry. You still on a bunch of Tampa Bay? How much did you end up with them on FanDuel? Because I think it's very applicable also on Yahoo.
I'm not sure how much I'll end up with in terms of an actual percentage, but it's going to probably be my highest owned stack, or at least in the top grouping there. They came up a ton for me in Cruncher. I'm just dropping that now into my sorting tool and trying to get to my lineups here, but I expect to have a bunch of Tampa, which is usually the case. When I write a team up, you guys out there can pretty much rely on the fact that I'm going to have a lot of them. So if I get it wrong, I'm at least going down in flames with you if you follow me.
Well, that's good to know, because I definitely, it would really suck to see you not have any and me, get absolutely destroyed by such things. But you know what? Such things do happen in baseball DFS. So I'm not going to ever complain, but you are definitely one of the honest Abes of this industry. I'm none too worried about you. You basically say exactly what you're going to do, but we got Loco just said every single lineup is in. We're just kind of looking at this. We got 2 minutes here before lock. So make sure you are getting your entries in now. You should probably already have some dummies in. That's always a good idea. It would save people like EMAC who play 84,000 different slates and 8 different sports every single night. So I don't know what other sports are available outside of MLB tonight, but I can guarantee you that EMAC is grinding them here at this point in time. But let's see. I guess let's just kind of finish it out. What are you kind of hoping for tonight? What are you cheering off for one-offs? Shohei Ohtani going to be my highest owned batter over on DK. I'm going way contrarian over there. I'm only playing like 12 different lineups, but I mean, I've got him in 4 of 12 here at this point in time. I'm just kind of hoping for the contrarian spend up. He's sitting all the way now up at 5,900. I'm hoping that the ownership comes way down on him, going up against a lefty here and a bad Baltimore bullpen. I'm just kind of expecting big things out of him. The lefty-lefty matchup makes people run away, but what are your kind of final impressions and one-offs that you have for this evening?
I will tell you that I'm struggling to get these lineups in here.
I was trying to stall for you. I was trying my best. I kept talking. I kept talking.
You were stretching and you almost got me there. I just have to click the.
Okay. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go very slowly, and we're going to just take a look at things. This could turn into like an ASMR kind of a thing where I just start going in the mic. You got it?
Love it. Yeah, we're good.
Yay. So, there we go.
Looks like I'm going to be on some offbeat pitching, like we've talked about here, more than I was expecting to be based on this kind of clunky sort that I ended up doing. So we'll see how that comes out in the wash. I only entered like a half a slate of lineups today just because I was in a hurry doing stuff throughout the afternoon. So I'm going to be all over the place today. We're going to have some fun with this one and see how it comes out in the wash.
Love it. Well, I think that's kind of it for us here. We're 1 minute before lock here. Oh, we just hit lock. As I said things, Terry, any final words for the people on our way out?
I'll catch everybody tomorrow. I'm on the early strategy show. I think it's me and EMAC probably. And then after that, I'm headed up to the Yanks-Mets game. Hopefully it won't be raining for that one.
Let's hope not. I'm sick of these rain delays. I'm over it. Hopefully today everything kind of works out in everybody's favor. We have no other shows this evening, but as you said, you're going to be on tomorrow morning. We're going to have a bunch of NBA stuff leading up to that big Game 6 of the Bucks and the Hawks. That should be a good one. Thank you so much. What was that?
C-Mac in the chat answered your question about the slates that he's playing, and there's like 11 different things in there. I didn't even know there was anything other than baseball.
I mean, what in the living hell? Anyway, he's Terry. I'm Eric Lindquist. Have a safe, fantastic July 4th weekend, you all. We're out of here.